No, we're going to do the Board of Ed.
Oh, no. What order are you doing it?
Board of Ed, and then Revenue, and then onward. That's how we always do it. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Board of Finance meeting for the vote on the 2017 fiscal year budget. This is a public executive session, which means no public comment at this meeting. I'm going to ask our Budget Director, Mrs. Gardner, to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance this evening.
I pledge allegiance
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Welcome, everyone, to the end of a long and winding road, which is this budget process as it relates to this board. Before we get started, I want to extend our appreciation and our thanks to the finance offices of both the Board of Education and the town for the excellent work that went into the preparation of all the documents as well as the supporting documents and our information requests throughout this budget process. I also want to extend our thanks to the department heads who've worked diligently on this budget process through since at least November of last year, and I'm probably shortchanging that a little bit. Thank you as well to our colleagues on the Board of Selectmen and First Selectman Tetro for their help and guidance and their camaraderie at our table, and to Mr. Tetro for the donuts and coffee this evening. Although I think he staffed that out, actually. Rules of the road tonight. As I mentioned earlier, there's no public comment at this meeting. However, members can ask questions if there's department heads in attendance, or Mr. Tetro, or members of the Board of Selectmen or the Board of Education. At the beginning of the meeting, after this soliloquy, I will ask for a motion to put the budget before us in its entirety. Linda, I would ask that as we go through the departments, you remind us of which changes were made by those departments, or for those departments, by the Board of Selectmen at their meeting earlier this week, because obviously they are not reflected in our budget book. This evening, we're going to vote on amendments, so what I will do is call out each department, and if there's an amendment to that department, we will vote on that amendment, and then we will vote on the budget in its entirety at the end. And Mrs. Gardner and Mr. Mayor will help us keep an exact tally. The goal tonight would be, as we've done in past years, to do the Board of Education budget first, given that's the one that gets the most public interest and the most attendance, and we want to be sensitive to the public's time. Then we'll start with the revenue line items in the beginning of the book and go throughout the budget book as we move forward. Do I have any questions, comments, or concerns from board members at this time? Mr. Stone?
Do we have copies of the changes in the selection?
Do we have hard copies of the changes that you can distribute to the board as well? Thank you. We'll pause for that. Thank you, Mr. Stone. While we wait for those, Dr. Tito, do you want to come up to the front, please, and whomever you'd like to bring with you, because there was some additional information forwarded to us tonight. Do we have copies of that by any chance, hard copies of the documents that were emailed earlier today?
I didn't bring extras. I don't know if Doreen has them. Do you have? You can make some.
You have copies?
Jim,
Thank you, Mrs. Gardner.
that's the one I wrote.
Which one do you have?
It's the Internal Service Fund,
One that ended with 7.
or rather, the Board of Education's review of their portion of the Internal Service Fund.
I don't, but this one?
Yeah.
You have that or you need it?
I'm asking if we have hard copies. I think we do.
I think they have it.
They have them, okay.
Yeah.
Doreen, why don't you come up?
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, do we have everything that you'd like to distribute? Any other questions, comments from board members?
We're all set.
Seeing none, do I have a motion to put the budget before us? Mr. DeWitt, do I have a second? Mrs. Leclerc? Okay, the budget is now before us in its entirety. We're going to start with the Board of Education. Dr. Tito, Ms. Manzel, thank you for being here. Before I turn it over for questions on this one, because there's new information, let me make a couple of comments, if I might. At the Board of Selectmen meeting the other day, there was a cut of, I believe, $1.25 million, close to $1.3 million to that budget. It was made up of two specific items, or recommended on two specific items. The first one, which we're going to talk about in a second, is relative to the internal service fund, the shared fund between the town and the Board of Education that covers the insurance risk for the town. The reduction that was passed by the Board of Selectmen relates to better experience in the medical area of the risk fund, of the internal service fund, versus prior months and prior years. It was a large delta at this time. It came out, I believe, to between $900,000 and $1 million, and I think we'll be stepped through that. That information was not available to this board until after the Board of Selectmen vote. I'm not exactly sure when the Board of Selectmen got that vote, but really what that represents is a change in estimate. It's a change in estimate from prior estimates, and we track that on a monthly basis. There's several large estimates that the Board of Education deals with in their budget every year. Those estimates range from what you're going to get back from the state for special ed and other grants, which is not specifically known until the state passes their budget, which is later this year, so there's an estimate for that. The second estimate would be teacher retirements, which, as Dr. Tittle has pointed out, those retirements aren't typically known in their entirety until after the school year, because the teachers who want to retire do not notify the school system until after the school year is done. The third estimate is how many teachers may need to be hired because of a change in the number of sessions or a number of students per class. And that's an estimate that the Board of Education or the Education Administration puts in place every year as well. And the fourth estimate is, in previous years, including this fiscal year, what's going to happen with the medical costs, because we are self-insured and those medical costs are based on claims that need to be processed. And we track those estimates on a monthly basis throughout the budget cycle so that we can understand whether we're running higher or lower in the town's internal service fund, which is basically the town's insurance fund, their cash reserves. So the adjustment of $800,000 to the Board of Education budget was made relative to those cash reserves relative to the experience that came on in the last couple of months, and that became available. Okay. The other adjustment that was made was to another one of the estimates, and that estimate was related to teachers. In the past, we've budgeted teacher retirements that offset the cost of hiring new teachers should there be new sections needed because of issues with the number of staff. This year, when the Board of Education prepared their budget, they changed their process for that. Not only did they estimate the number of retirements, and they estimated that number of retirements at 18, when the 5-year average is closer to the mid-20s, so there's some cushion in there relative to experience over the past number of years. They also, for the first time, budgeted for having to hire additional teachers for those different sections. Now, the Board of Selectmen made the determination that that was double counting. There were two contingencies in there. The contingencies for the retired teachers, which is the way we've been doing it in the past, as well as this additional contingency for 7 teachers that may or may not need to be hired depending on what happens with those sections. So the Board of Selectmen made the determination that that was really covered twice, i.e. the double contingency, or the quote-unquote double contingency. I've seen a lot of email traffic, as have my colleagues here on the board, that have indicated the thought that this was a programmatic cut, or this was a cut to program, or a cut to technology, or a cut to maintenance. That's not what it was. What it was a cut to one of the estimates. In fact, the large cut of 1.3 was both of those elements were cuts to estimates, not cut to investment in technology, or cut to investment in maintenance, or cut to investment in textbooks and curriculum, as has been articulated or circulated in the public. That's what it was. And I just wanted to clarify that because I think there's been a lot of concern on the part of the public. And Dr. Teitel can speak for himself. He and I have had many conversations on this over the last several days. And in fact, the entire estimating process is something that we've all dealt with for many, many years collectively. As better information comes available, as the budget weaves its way through the months and through the process. Okay? I hope that helps a little bit. My apologies for taking so much time, but I did want to provide that context given the angst that has been in the public about the adjustments that were made. All right? Today, we were provided an additional document by the Board of Education relative to the Medical Reserve Fund. This is information that, Mr. Mayor, correct me if I'm wrong, this was not available to the Board of Selectmen when they voted on Tuesday, correct?
Well,
Please. It's not on. Okay. So this schedule wasn't
am I
on.
on
yet.
now? I'm on, thank
Yeah,
you.
thank you, Mr. Mayor. So what I'd like to do, with my colleagues' permission, is turn it over to Dr. Teitel, Ms. Manzel, and have them walk us through this schedule. It's a schedule that we are familiar with, at least the format of it, but it has been updated. Dr. Teitel, would you want to take over for a couple minutes and walk us through this, please?
Sure. Oh, sorry for the scariness there. So really, the critical columns on this are 7, 8, and 9, because those are the ones that are updated based on the February experience. So while we had not prepared this document prior to Tuesday, we did know, and the selectmen knew, that we had a substantial improvement in our experience, which is what allowed them to make the decision to take the cut. It was an estimate at that time. There were some discrepancies between the way Mr. Mayor calculated it, the way Mrs. Mancella calculated it, but we knew the general scope of it. And as you can see in column 7, that back in, based on the December experience, we were looking at a balance in the internal service fund after the IBNR of about $730,000. And that improved for the February experience to 1.623698. So that was the big improvement that occurred. And that's 2 months of experience, the most recent 2 months, and then the experience that happened a ways falls off. So that's the most recent 12 months trended out to the end of the year. So the estimate that's before you now, the best available information, is that after paying the IBNR off, which we will have to pay off, we would have a balance of $1,623,698. Now, what then happens is we then have put in column 9 the impact of the reductions that have been taken to that account. So the Board of Ed budgeted for 16-17 in column 8, the purple, $20,846,039. And that's what we believed was necessary to balance the books for next year, based on our estimated costs, which are listed down below. So what happened then is the first selectmen's budget cut in the health insurance account was $980,000. Now, he offset that with knowing that we were losing $250,000 in state funding, for special education, but the cut to the health insurance was $980. Then the cut that occurred on Tuesday was another $800,000. So that would bring, and the way we handle that is when we say, all right, you don't need as much in your budget for healthcare because the internal service fund has grown so much, we reduce our budget contribution. So our new budget number, if everything else stayed exactly the same all the way out, in other words, if you pass this budget exactly as it's in front of you and the RTM doesn't change anything, then the Board of Ed's health insurance line would be $19,066,039. That's what that other purple is underneath. That's how we handle it, okay? So, because essentially what's happening is the real cost, the $20,846,000, they're being paid out of the balance, that $1,623,698. The only other change in those columns is down where it says reserve for potential claims and fees, and it's in red because when the first selectman made his adjustment, he said that's a $500,000 reserve that the Board of Ed had put in there because we didn't know what was going to happen to Experience. And he left that in there because there were potentially some Aon fees that may need to be paid in the order of $150,000, and that another 100 was left in as a contingency. So at the end of the day, if that turns out to be true, if the estimates play out exactly correct, and the cuts go through, and we end up, needing the $250,000 for claims and fees, then the balance in that account will drop to $93,698.
Now, thank you, Dr. Teitel. Mr. Mayor, have you had the opportunity to look at these numbers? In other words, are the town and the Board of Ed in agreement on these numbers?
We're in total sync.
Okay. So the two concerns we should have here are volatility over the next 4 months, right?
That's a big concern.
And
That's
then
one concern.
And then the second concern would be
The cliff.
the built-in hill
Right.
for funding for next year.
Right. So I gave those numbers out in the email that I sent.
Right.
I don't know if you've got a hard copy of it, but basically, right, there's two issues. So one is, should the claims experience deteriorate between now and the end of June, and this $1,623,000 shrink, then we don't have a whole lot in column 9 to make that up.
Right.
And at some point, that needs to be made up by somebody at some point.
Right.
That's one concern. The second concern I had, which is why I kind of lost it a little at the Board of Selectmen meeting.
You? No.
Yeah, it's hard to believe, is that, I didn't want to leave, a time bomb that's going to explode in 12 months. And that is that we're building in a cliff because essentially we're using this surplus, a one-time surplus, to pay an operating expense. And so instead of having sort of your normal trend increase, if you had a $20 million line item, which is approximately, and typically you'd have a 5%, say, increase, you're going to look at about $1 million increase in the 17-18 budget. But because we're drawing down on this reserve and substituting that for operating budget money, in fact, the increase is more on the lines of $2.3 million. So there's about a $1.3 million delta there.
Well, that assumes a 5% increase in premium next
And
year.
that, both of those assume a 5% increase in premiums and assumes a 5% therefore increase in our revenue to offset those premiums.
Right.
Yeah. Now, obviously, if it's 6%, then your normal expected increase would be $1.2 million, and your increase, everything will go up relatively speaking. So it's an example. Now, the state's plan has been averaging 4 to 5% a year, so it's not way off. So my concern is, that I expressed, was that while it's tempting to take as much as possible to drive down the tax rate and so forth, and that's an admirable thing to do, and nobody wants to pay more taxes than they have to, this particular move is setting up a Board of Ed budget increase baked into 17-18 of about $1.3 million more than you would otherwise expect.
Right.
That's that's the cliff or the hill or whichever the right metaphor is. So you're exactly right. There's two potential issues that at some point have to get resolved
But
down the road.
but from the public's perspective, it could also be pay me now or pay me later.
That's correct. Yeah, I mean, that's exactly right. It's not something, because essentially.
Because we don't believe we're going to need the full 800,000 in the account to
Right,
pay off the claims out of this, right?
right. So, I mean, it's a bet.
Right.
You
Because
know.
right now your reserve, and I'm sorry, guys,
Yeah.
if the reserve right now, okay, so the bigger issue that I have is the volatility that you're talking about, right? We've got 4 months left in the year. To land this aircraft carrier within $90,000 is going to be a very difficult thing to do with 4 months left, right? It's a third of the year.
And we can't control it.
Right.
Right? It's not like we can say, oh, let's,
Right.
let's cut back on health insurance so we know we have enough at the end of the year. This is an out-of-our-control expense. Right.
So the real reserve that's sitting there right now, though, is the 250 plus the 94.
That's correct, but
So-
some of the 250 is spoken for in the sense that we have this anticipated expense for administrative fees.
Well, you already took some of that out when you lowered the 500,000.
No, that was built on a premise of $150,000 in Aon fees and $100,000 in cushion.
Right, so you took that, okay, but why'd it go from 500 to 250?
Because
I thought
250
there
was
a
taken
seven.
out to cover for the special ed funding loss from the state.
Okay, all right. So we have 250, we have about 350 sitting there,
Correct.
of which we have maybe access to
200 of it.
200 to 300.
Yeah,
depending.
and we don't know exactly what those fees will be, but it's in that range.
Right.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's the cushion, that's the money we have to play with. And, you know, the way this has been represented is that, you know, the Board of Ed has obviously been very careful in the past, and I've been very careful, to make sure that if we make any adjustments to this internal service fund in our budget process, that the town bodies are on board with that.
Right.
So, you know, if you say to the Board of Ed, look, it's okay, we don't think you're going to need it, it's okay, you can take that money out, and if it goes in the red, it has to be made up somewhere, somehow, but it won't have to be made up in 16, 17, then it doesn't impact 16, 17, you know, operations.
You're
But
just
it-
raising the hill for the next year.
That's right, so you've got two potential hills,
Right.
right? Hill number
Oh,
one.
it's just a steeper hill.
A steeper hill. It's a false top.
Right.
All right? So you know you've got a $1.3 million hill, and that will be plus or minus what happens with the experience between now and the end of the year. So you could potentially have the $1.3 million hill, and then if experience deteriorates beyond, let's say, 300,
Right.
you've got a double hill.
Right. Does everybody understand? Let's go to Mr. Stone
Yeah,
first.
go
I saw him
please,
first,
yeah.
and then we'll go to Mr.
No,
DeWitt.
please.
But the experience could also get better.
It could.
Yeah.
Sure. I mean, it could get better, and there could be more money in there. That's correct. I mean, that's what I'm saying.
Well,
I
it's
mean,
a gamble.
It's a bet.
Yeah.
It's a bet, right. Just a matter of how much risk you want to take.
But we're just voting on one big number when we vote here.
Well, we actually give directive on this number.
we?
In reality.
We
I
give
mean,
directive, but
Well,
it's
the
one
Board of
big nu-
Education has been good partners the last number of years. When we say put it into the internal service fund,
No, I agree.
you
But
don't.
it's still, we're just voting on one number.
Mr. DeWitt?
So just so I'm clear, Dr. Tittle, under the reserve line, the 500 went to 250, that was a Board of Ed change.
No, first selectman change.
It was?
Yes.
Okay. But that helped your cause?
It helped us
Reduced your expense?
reduce the estimated expense. I don't know if that helped the cause.
Right.
Or hurt the cause. I think it acknowledged that the state has already cut the equivalent of $250,000 out of our special ed expenses, so the Board of, so in that sense it helped.
Right.
But
But the Board
it
of
doesn't
Selectmen
help
found
this.
it best to take it out of reserve, so, I understand.
Yeah.
One quick interjection, if I may. The first selectman budget,
Board of Selectmen budget.
no, first selectman,
Oh, sorry.
added 250,000 To make up for the 250.
in that reserve line.
In that
Hence-
Well, no,
hence the-
he added it to the budget. The net,
Net cut was
the net cut was
Right.
730.
That's correct.
Okay, but the change.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, remember, the net cut was
That's the
730.
980.
Right.
Exactly.
730 plus 250.
Correct.
Right.
Correct.
That's
yeah.
it.
So, okay.
Thank you.
Wait a minute, can I ask a question while we're still there? That 250, explain that to me again. Where's the 250 coming from?
Well, originally it was, this is, I mean, I don't want to speak for the board, but originally it was 500 in there. There's two different things that have happened subsequent to them with respect to the experience improvement. One, we have a shorter risk period, and two, there's some improvement to the IBNR because of the improved experience. Improvement to the IBNR is about $80,000 by itself, the shorter risk period. So, I mean, it makes sense to have a reduction in there. The other side of it, though, is, as the chair and Dr. Tyler both stated, this is a volatile account, and it can go either way. It's important to realize what we're talking about really is not impacting Board of Ed ops. This is an internal service fund, healthcare type budget issue. So it's, but, and also one other piece of information, if I may, the department, town finance department met with the Board of Ed finance department today to go through the accounting for this through 17. And we've been trying to meet for a while and just got everybody's schedules together, where we finally actually met at 2:30 this afternoon. And whereas initially I was thinking it'd be kind of neat and clean to like cut it all off July 1, 2016, but from an accounting and management and setting up the accounts and the transition effect, perspective, I think it was pretty much universally agreed that it makes more sense to run it through the Internal Service Fund, through the Board of Ed for the full year, and then cut it off July 1, 2017. Is that pretty much, yeah.
After the runoff is done for
Right,
this current year.
correct,
And at the end of next fiscal year.
right.
So there'll still be risk in the internal service fund in 17 from the Board of Ed, even though they're on a different program.
Through the runoff pluses and minuses, that's the correct statement.
Through
So
the
you-
runoff.
Okay.
plus-
So the administration and the Board of Education is in agreement, I just want to make sure I'm getting this correct, that on July 1st of 2018, not $1 Board of Ed money will pass through the internal service fund again. It'll be over.
Given the current situation, I can't say forever, I mean,
Well, while they're on their 2.0
yes,
plan.
correct statement, correct
Can I
statement.
correct that one thing? That starts July 1st, 2017.
17, right?
Yeah, 2017, I'm sorry, 17, 17,
Well,
sorry.
I'm sorry, well, maybe I misunderstood the question then.
No, you're
something-
saying basically they're going to be in the internal service fund through the end of this fiscal year and throughout next fiscal year.
Right, so
as they do
July
the
1,
runoff.
18, there'd be
Budget
0
18.
more.
July 1.
17.
2017, you're right.
Fiscal year 18.
I was talking the fiscal year 18.
Yes.
Yeah.
So
yes.
it's July 1, 17
Yes.
for fiscal
Right,
year
phys-
18.
correct.
I just want to make sure we're all on the.
Yeah, right, you got it.
Right. Go ahead, Mr. DeWitt. I'm sorry, you were interrupted.
Nope, no problem. So I understand everything here, thank you. But in column 8, $1.623 billion, isn't it really 643,698? Because that was the Board of Selectmen's, excuse me, that was the first Selectmen's reduction. Because, and I know it hadn't been voted upon, but, and the reason I'm bringing this up is, if column 8 is reduced by that 980,000, that number of 643,698 is actually a reduction from December, therefore making this situation even a little bit worse. Agree?
Column 8 represents,
That's your budget,
that's our budget with no changes to it.
even from the
except
first selectmen's cut.
Correct. That's our budget with
As
no
proposed.
changes, as proposed, with
Right.
only the change in experience, showing a greater
Right.
balance.
My point is that between
You could have
December
column
and
8.5.
February, a couple things happened. There was experience, but the first selectman also cut that number by 980,000.
That's not reflected in this.
That's not reflected. So my,
Right,
so
that's
my
correct.
point to you,
and I think I'm helping you, so.
right.
Should be 643,
I'm getting
690.
real agnostic about this.
I know. I think the number should be 643, 698, therefore making it worse than it was in December. Therefore, making the issue now is still the same. That 93,000 number is bad. I'm in agreement there. But I think even going into that final $800,000 cut, the number was lower than that by almost $1 million. See, right?
Yeah, I mean, there could
Well,
be,
by the 980
there
cut.
could have been, column 8.5 that has in
You would've
between,
had
right?
But you would have had $623,000 in there,
643, right.
whatever. Okay.
Yeah, we didn't put the in-between in there, which you just filled it in. This is complicated enough.
Are you good, Chris?
Yeah, no, yeah.
Okay. Mr. Walsh?
Dr. Title, when you said that the 250 was the first selectmen's cut, what did you mean by that on the 500 to 250? 'Cause
Right,
Mr. Mayor said
so-
something a little bit.
No, that's right. So basically, they took $250,000 there and said, we're going to assign this over to the special ed expenses.
So how's, I guess, where does, I don't understand how special ed expenses are in the internal service fund or being managed through.
They're not in the internal service fund. Essentially, what they're saying is that you can take this account down by $980,000, and you can take $250,000 and add it to your special ed accounts in the operating budget. So my net cut to you is $730.
Of the total
980
Board
in
of
the
Ed
internal
budget.
service fund, negative, 250 positive because of the state budget cut. So when he announced the $730,000 cut, that's how we got to it. So there's no special ed expenses in the internal service fund.
It was
just,
managing through it by doing adjustments to this internal service fund.
so it's basically saying you know.
No, he only,
No.
no, he did two different, he recommended, and I don't want to speak for him, but recommended
Right,
two
yeah.
different adjustments, the net impact of which was 730. 980 down, based on experience in the internal service fund, completely separate and unrelated to that, $250,000 up
Right.
in special education costs that you guys had been alerted to would not be reimbursed by the state.
Where's the extra $100,000 that the first selectman let you keep out of that?
It's in the-
that
it's-
December
it-
experience number?
Right, so it's in that 250 that's still there. So we had put in $500,000 as a cushion. So the cushion is quote-unquote cushion, is $250,000 now, of which the estimate was $100,000 was for medical expenses, and $150,000 was a potential a liability for administrative fees that were not part of the budget. So that's where the 100 is. It's in the 250.
All right, and we are going to be paying that 150 for administrative fees?
Yes.
Okay, we have a contract for that?
No, but it's, we've had a contract, the contract changes with the movement to the state, so there'll be revisions.
And the reason I'm asking is Carlton seemed surprised that he thought that was a discussion purpose, and he was surprised that you'd locked him into the 150. So if it's going to be 180 or 200, we should probably know about it, I guess.
I'm confident in my
You're
numbers.
confident that you'll lock him down to 150?
sir.
Okay.
It's a good discount.
What other comments do we have or questions on this?
In regards to the internal service fund?
Yeah, in regards to the Board of Ed number on the internal service fund? This specific amendment? All right.
Is that with us?
I'm
I'm happy to stay, but
Just stay for a couple minutes while we have
Sure.
a discussion here.
Okay, no
I
problem.
think. It's okay, I'd like to kick it off. Given this information, which is a new analysis that wasn't prepared, or wasn't completed, it was in process on Tuesday. I'm uncomfortable with a full reduction of 800,000 here, because I think it leaves us exposed. The volatility concerns me more than the Hill issue, because the Hill issue we just have to acknowledge. And the question comes down to pay me now or pay me later on the Hill issue, in terms of the funding of it.
Can the Hill issue be spread out?
No.
Does it have to be taken care of next fiscal year? if
Well,
there's an
because you're going to
issue?
have the premiums that you have to
You would
pay.
have to pay the premiums, right?
Yeah. So it is, I mean, you're building it in.
There was some discussion, though, about the runoff. I thought that was something that didn't have to be paid off next fiscal year. When we were talking about this a couple of months ago, there was some discussion about that. It could be spread out over, well, I know we talked about it. Maybe I misunderstood it, but
Well, the runoff, and that, I think is to Mr. Mayor's point, should be completely resolved a year out, right? And that's, your whole comment about leaving.
99.7%.
Right. So you're leaving the amount and basically running the insurance through the internal service fund for an additional fiscal year, primarily to allow the runoff of the old plan and for those claims to be processed and paid out through the internal service fund.
Right.
So that has to be paid as well. So, I mean, we just have to acknowledge that. And I think Dr. Title's been forthright about that you're building in a hill for next year.
and I think it's important that we all recognize there's going to be a hill next year.
Right.
When a new superintendent comes with a budget, and we all have to acknowledge that and
Right.
remember that.
Well,
Mr. Walsh.
I'm going to ask questions after this, because I'm going to, I guess.
Ask him now. Bring-
About the hill?
Yeah.
Okay. I want to talk about the valley. The valley I see is that in this budget, and there's been a lot of talk about it, we're playing catch-up on technology, maintenance, textbooks. All valid points. All valid that your budget, you've been running lean budgets, whatever. And we hear a lot about that we need to catch up and one-time expenses and things like that. Where, I know you're not going to be superintendent after this year, and you're probably thanking yourself for that decision right now. But where are those savings going to be? Because are you trying to, it came up during our budget discussion that you weren't trying to reset the baseline. Just like we're not trying to reset your baseline on insurance. Okay? What?
So apparently you are.
No, I don't think so, because I think we're acknowledging that you have this hole.
Right. You're resetting it lower, but saying
Yes.
we're setting it lower.
But you're also resetting some of these lines, or at least it's going to look like that,
Right.
higher in textbooks, maintenance, and technology for some type of one-time expenses, because I know you say your budget expense is 2.01 after the first selectman deducted from your 2.59. I've looked at different calculations. But you got that savings, the $1.5 million on the negotiated, which we're happy you did that, on the negotiated healthcare situation, but you're spending that as part of this. So if you looked at that, it would probably be closer to 3.4.
Right now we're down to 1.36 budget increase. As it sits before you right now, if you make no changes to this budget, the Board of Ed budget is going up 1.36%.
Okay. Does that include, when I say it's 3.14, when I look at it, because you're spending the $1.45 million worth of savings, it would be higher than that. But
Yeah.
we
The
could all look at-
2.1
we
is
could all
down to
look at numbers.
1.3 because of the cuts that were made by the Board of Selectmen.
What I'd like you to tell me is in those areas that you are pumping things up, obviously there's some new programming, there's bringing some of the world language down to the third grade. But primarily, the big areas seem to be maintenance, technology, and textbooks. And I know I don't want to revisit the entire conversation.
Okay.
Because I want you to think that I did hear what you said. Textbooks, you said was going to be high again next year because we were going to a different social studies textbook, correct?
Right, and science.
This year was in science, and this year
Right.
was math,
And then it's going to drop off.
and then you said it's going to drop off. So I
Right.
can expect to see that number drop off.
I think in the 17-18 budget, I don't think you'll see it drop. It may drop off some, but it's not going to fall off the cliff. But in 18-19 is when it should go back down to sort of its normal state, which was around a $400,000 number, because you've gone through the big academic areas, and those are the expensive ones. So I think you've got one more year of a textbook number, again, in the ballpark, okay? There may be some opportunities for reduction, but I don't think it'll be a major material reduction there. But I think the following year you will see it. I think that technology, I think this is in my view, I think we sent this out to you. Nancy Burns prepared the 5-year replacement cycle, refresh cycle that we have. And if you take out the switches, which caused that thing to spike in about 2 or 3 years, that thing is pretty calm from here on out. So I don't think you're going to see the need to keep technology replacement at the level it's at right now.
Do you see that going down?
I could see that coming down
Next year
a
or
bit.
when?
I think it can start to come down
Yep.
next year. There's a lot of unknowns around technology, and often, that's an account where we want to get as far as we can with it, but unfortunately, over the years, it's been one we've sliced back. So we are making up for lost ground, but I don't see it. The tech capital is $2 million. Again, I'm not going to be here to somebody come in behind me and say, Title was nuts. What was he talking about? Of course, we need $2 million. I could see that thing falling back a couple $100,000, or more going forward. But you certainly don't have enough to offset $1.3 million in the health insurance. And, things are changeable throughout the budget. I mean, right, there's always, things that can go up and go down from year to year, but, we know there's certain, pretty much fixed costs. In the maintenance area,
Yeah, the maintenance area.
that was the other piece I think you wanted me to
Yes.
comment on. The maintenance projects area is going up about $150,000. Some of these other ones that are not huge increases by themselves, painting and, snowplow and paving. There's not big opportunity for those to back down anyways. They're not really all going up that much. The two real big ones that I think are the ones you've hit on there, which is the textbooks and the tech capital. That's where the biggest action is. The rest of it's relatively minor. And I think those are things that, the board's going to have to determine going forward, what are the priorities when they see what all the other expenses are. What worries me, quite honestly, is that, you're going to be starting out with this $1.3 million problem, and then there's going to be huge pressure on the board to scale all those things back down again because, hey, we got to cover the $1.3 million. And that's what worries me about the future budget. So whatever you feel you can do to minimize the cliff or the hill, obviously would help, and not simply reverting all the way back down in those accounts, because then you're just back to where you started from. You made a one-time gain, and now you're stuck.
Okay, I'm just trying to get a sense of next year, when we talk about the hill, what are we
Yeah.
going to have to offset that hill?
Right.
And
So, yeah,
all
it's-
I've heard so far is maybe a couple $100,000 in tech.
Yeah.
Maybe it won't be a lot next year in the books. It might be $400,000 in a year, the year after that.
I think the year after that might be, 400,000. The following year is a good guess.
Okay.
Yeah.
And
So no,
then-
there's not a
And then the
ton.
maintenance is like 100 or 150,000.
Yeah, there's not a
So
ton.
when you add that all up, it's almost like we are resetting the level in many of these areas by $1 million.
You've got some that we're still trying to get back to the pre-recession levels on. So these things are not going to outrageous levels. But one thing you're doing, and what this does on the health insurance is that even if our Board of Ed health insurance is $20 million, let's just say that number, sort of back where it sort of covers our costs. The current year budget for health insurance is $22,336,000. So
It's significant.
we're resetting that to a much lower number. So going up, before you're going to go up 5% a year for 2 years before you ever get back to where you are this very year. And of course, if we didn't change plans, that number was going to go even higher. So in some cases, we're resetting the base a little bit higher. In other cases, we're taking it way down, and the overall budget, as it currently stands, is going up at the moment 1.36%. So you're not really setting the whole base up very high, depending on what you decide if you want to put any of that stuff back in. So, I don't think you're looking at, if you think about the 17-18 budget, you can expect somewhere in the neighborhood of of a couple, say, couple percentage points for salary increases based on negotiated contracts.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
3% settlements, right?
Yep.
And so, on $100 million, $3 million is it's about 2 percentage points, right? I'm doing some real rounding here. If your health insurance is, say, I'll round it to 2.4 million increase, that's 1.5 points. So now before you put any other expenses on top of that for, say, increases in special ed costs or increases in your bus contract or anything else that may just go up with inflation, not everything does, but some things will, you're starting next year's budget at 3.5%. Okay? And that's not a great place to start,
No?
right? You would all agree with that. And you're not going to, land on another $1 million of savings out of the blue. So my concern is then that becomes a big headline number, and it's like, you got to get that down. We can't live with that. And then all these other accounts that have some discretion are going to get whacked. And that's what I worry about, and that's why whatever you can do to minimize the hill will really help next year's budget, if you follow what I'm saying.
Yes. Yep. Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Okay. Back to the table, Mr. Stone?
Are we factoring in for the, I guess, 2 years from now, declining school population?
Yeah, you're talking about the 17-18?
I think so.
Yeah, the 17-18 budget. Yeah.
I mean, it's 100 down this year, right?
It's projected to go down by about 80. And it's projected to go down about the same the following year. So, you could conceivably see a small headcount reduction that could mitigate what Mr. Walsh was saying. That's possible. That could be a positive in terms of the budget, but it's not going to save the day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the students that are leaving, are those more high school level students?
No. The high schools are going to continue to be quite large, and of course, high school students are more expensive.
Yeah.
No, the decreases are at the elementary level. What's happening is, if you sort of look at our grid, for the next couple of years, we have some very large elementary classes that are currently in 4th and 5th grades. Sometimes as 800 so kids, and they're being replaced by kindergartens of, say, 650. And so that's really where it's happening, is at the elementary level. And, that does, depending on where they fall on the grid, result in a reduction in teachers. So this year at the elementary, I know that brings up the other sore point about our reserve, but we have got about an 80 student reduction, and even if we hired all 7 teachers that are in that reserve, we're still down 5. So we are taking down the teacher count, and at the middle school, we're taking down 2.5. So we do take the head count down when there aren't kids there to teach. But that's where the action is. The elementary is where the action is for the next couple of years.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments from board members? So where I'm going to speak for myself. I started it. The $94,000 number scares me from the volatility standpoint. This is an account that we got negative comments on from rating agencies several years ago. It's an account where we've seen the volatility just in the last couple of months, where it's come. Thankfully, the volatility has been in our favor. We haven't seen it quite so large in past years, though we have seen the volatility in past years as well. That concerns me more right now as we sit here than the hill, only from the standpoint, and I don't want to minimize that, but only from the standpoint, as Mr. Walsh points out, there should be savings coming in next year to help mitigate some of that. And there's other stuff that's just unknown, right? Now, you could easily make an argument to add more back, to stand pat and let this ride. In the short term, I'm more inclined to add a little bit back here to help us with the volatility over the next 4 months. The number I had in my mind that I would be comfortable with adding back would be about $300,000. And I say that, and I get there, I take the 250, I take the 94, I'm going to round that and say that's about 350, plus another 300. That gives us a total variable there for the next 4 months to cover us of $650,000. Now, if our experience improves, that 650 can be used to help with the hill. If our experience deteriorates, this covers us from going negative in the internal service fund, which is something that this board has been worried about for a number of years now. Mr. Mayor, what's your thought on that, since you're the closest to this from a financial standpoint? Day-to-day, I should say.
You know, we've had a run, and a good run in the internal service fund. I see some of that continuing, but I think addressing the volatility issue for some comfort is not a bad idea.
Anybody else have any thoughts? Mr. Walsh?
The volatility in the internal service fund, I mean, Bob, I've heard you say it over the last week or so, 2 weeks, how much better it's got. It used to be negative 7.5.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
we're
it's
we're
actually
within like $1
it's-
million of closing the gap to being zero. I've also heard other members of this board talk about the fact that these numbers can be made up over 20 years. There's no rush to put money back into it.
Well, there's a couple of comments there. One, we've had a good run, and we are, projecting going into next year, pretty near flat. And the other thing that's changed is that the rating agencies are viewing it the total liability structure as opposed to account individual liability structure. So they're folding in our OPEB and our pension plan liabilities, which are very, very strong compared to most people. So the negative that's here doesn't have the same impact, though they still like mentioning it, just so they have something to mention, kind of like the same with our fund balance. They like to mention it, but it's it could be. It's not the concern it was when it was a negative $7 million. There's no question about that.
You mean in your most recent rating call, you just had one within the last 30 days, right?
Yeah, we pointed out to them the continued improvement. That is correct.
Yeah, and so it wasn't that big a deal, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Any other comments?
I see where you're coming from, but from my standpoint, I'd rather keep it the way it is and worry about future years and future years. I know what you're saying, and you could be right, but for years now, we've been trying to get the taxes as low as possible.
Yep.
And I don't think we're doing any harm by leaving it this way. And it's not kicking the can down the road, because we don't know where the can's going to be. We're sort of guessing. So my feeling is to leave it the way it is.
Okay. Any others? Mr. DeWitt and then Mr. Becker.
When I look at this this overall sheet, which is a nice example, thank you. Our balance as of November was $276,000. December went to $729,000, and then February $1.6 million. These numbers change significantly. Now they're going in the right direction now, but I feel I agree with Mr. Flynn. Taking it to a number below 100,000 seems well, I don't know what it seems. It's bad, risky. Thank you. So I think I would be in favor of at least an addition of that 300,000, Mr. Flynn.
Mr. Becker?
On my end, I think I'm inclined to say we leave it where it is. The volatility consistently has trended really in our favor the closer we get to the finish line. And I can think of a number of years before I was on this board where it would start and the Board of Selectmen would make an adjustment, the Board of Finance, the RTM. By the time you get to the end of the year, it just consistently, the takedowns were always in this line because of the favorability. And that's one of the difficulties that I know that the First Selectman often deals with at the very beginning when trying to compile this, and the same with the Board of Ed, in that they've got to go off of, oftentimes 6-month type numbers, and there's a lot of assumptions, and it's padded up, but I think it's going to march down in the right direction, and I think at the end, we'll probably find ourselves, based on most of past history that I feel comfortable with, we'll be all right.
Any others?
Mr. Mayor, to me, it seems as though it seemed to have improved on the Board of Ed side once we had their experience. Was that the experienced, what's the rate that was different from the towns in their medical? We had Mr. Carlton here one year, and we found out the Board of Ed was using a different quotient or of some sort. I thought it was experience rating.
A couple of years ago, the Board of Ed made a decision to use a lower reserve, a lower trend level.
That was it, the trend.
Right.
And ever since that's turned, it seemed like it got a little better. So I think the fact that the trends are a little higher seems to be working for the Internal Service Fund.
Well, the other item was, there's a couple things that work in that, right? There was, number one, the Board of Ed for years and years was much, much higher.
Mm-hmm.
And they adjusted it downwards. They used some of the reserve for a couple of years.
Mm-hmm.
On the flip side, the town was much, much poorer on both the medical side as well as on the regular risk management side.
Correct.
So there were several things done. Number one, a number of years ago, heart and hypertension was moved out of this.
Right.
Number two, right, there were different programs put in place to address slip and fall cases and accidental items that lower the insurance incidence on the workers' comp, right? Number three, this board put more money into the Internal Service Fund
Correct.
specifically to try to address that. So we raised the reserves that helped address the $7 million.
Yeah, and in fact, I mean, everything you say is correct, and from my perspective, what we're really talking about here is the Internal Service Fund going forward, and as when you think about the rating agencies, when you think about that fund as a single account, though it doesn't have the same importance as it used to have as an individual account.
Yep.
Given that we are, and we do crow about it, that we're getting close. I mean, putting an extra 300,000 or 400,000 or 200,000 or whatever, as the chair is suggesting, is not a bad idea to protect the account.
So we've had our discussion, we've had our say. I'm just going to go ahead and make a motion here. And we'll just vote on it and go from there.
Sure.
So the motion I'm going to make is
Mary has a comment.
Oh, go ahead, Mary. I'm sorry, I forgot.
I was going to say, I just think it's a little bit high. Like, I would be in agreement to put an amount in, but after Dr. Title answered, like, Jim Walsh's questions on, like, that we could cut back a little on technology and a few things, then it looks like the 650 is kind of splitting the 1.3 cliff. So if we could save a little in other spots, maybe we could scale that down a little.
Okay, so do you have a number you're proposing?
I don't know, 200 or 250?
Okay, so I'm going to make a motion that we add $250,000 back to this budget specifically to go into the Internal Service Fund related to the medical costs for the fiscal year we're budgeting for, 2017 on the Board of Ed side. Do I have a second to my motion?
I'll second that.
Mr. DeWitt, do I have any discussion on my motion? Seeing none, the amendment to add $250,000 into these accounts specifically for the Internal Service Fund designation for the fiscal year 2017 is before us. All in favor? Opposed? 1, 2, 3. That item, I guess, carries.
7-2?
6-3.
Stone, Becker, and Walsh.
Oh.
Okay. The Board of Ed budget as adjusted is now before us, as amended. Any other questions, comments, concerns? Mr. Matola?
Yeah, you need to stay. I just
Making
wanted,
money here, stay.
wanted to talk about the 7 new teacher hires, the potential. Let me ask you this question first. So if I'm understanding your budget, you have accounted for a possible 18 retirees for next year, correct?
That's correct.
And you have this, I'm going to call it, is it a reserve fund to possibly hire 7 new teachers if your classroom numbers at the elementary level change? Is that a fair statement?
That's correct.
So the Board of Selectmen thought that you were double counting. Is that what they told you?
I think the term was double contingency.
Okay. Is it a double contingency?
Of course, I don't believe so.
All right.
And I took issue with that characterization, and Mr. Flynn and I have disagreed on that characterization, so it's in a friendly way, because the only way, in my view,
Is it a change in methodologies from
it's,
prior
it's,
years?
it's a change in methodology with respect
Thank you very
to
much.
it's a change in methodology with respect to the elementary teachers.
You actually,
if-
you
if
you
we
actually are
only-
adopting a methodology that was used before you were the superintendent, I
Right.
believe.
Yeah, well, so here's the thing. On the retiree front, we've had this discussion every single year. It's our favorite, parlor game. Guess the number of retirees, right?
You've never lost that bet.
And we've never lost that bet. Right, that's true.
We've lost that bet every year.
We lost that bet every year. So, if I knew that I would get 25 retirees, then I would save, then I have a built-in contingency of 7 times $36,000, because it's $36,000 per retiree, all right? And so to say I've put in, or the board's put in a double contingency, you have to be willing to say that I'm intentionally under budgeting retirees, because the retirees of 18 are not in themselves a contingency, because we take that right out of the budget. So it just so happens that this year, with an 80-student reduction at the elementary level, the grid works out to a 12-teacher reduction, which common sense would tell you is not likely. I mean, maybe 5, but the likelihood of that turning into 12-teacher, it just doesn't pass the smell test. So we have a lot of sections that are close. I'll be the first to say, if we didn't have a lot of sections that were close, I wouldn't be here. In fact, I'm regretting doing this as we speak. Okay? I should have buried it somewhere. All right? Where you couldn't find it, right? So right?
That just changed the game.
Right. I mean, we played this with an open hand.
Yep.
Right? We got a lot of classes that are close.
Yeah.
All right. So we said, look, we really think 18's the number. You can disagree with that. You could say, well, you're really going to have 25. But I don't see it that way. But I can see how people would see this as being overly conservative, too. I mean, I see the other side of this, okay? So we tried to say, look, a more likely number of reductions at the elementary level is probably 5, given an 80-student reduction. Hence, we put it in there. Again, somebody could say, you're being overly conservative, and I respect that viewpoint. But I'm just, and I'm joking about hiding it, because I've never hidden anything in this budget. But I just want you to say that, we were very clear about what we were doing. I don't consider it a double contingency, but other people might. So we'll just agree to disagree on that one.
Mr. Flynn, do you remember on this issue, I recall when I was on the Board of Education.
They had a
when
teacher's reserve.
we had a teacher's reserve, and we put the money aside, and if the Board of Ed didn't need it, they had this all figured out by August, September. my recollection is they returned the money.
No,
What
I
did they
never
do?
remember that.
What-
It went,
put it
went
into
directly into
their-
their budget.
Yep.
It was spent in
I
other
thought,
areas.
but then wasn't there an order?
The only,
for
the only time I can ever remember them returning money, it was under Dr. Title, and it was specifically related to too many teacher retirements, and it was $700,000, and it was about a year and a half ago. And he's absolutely correct on the transparency and being very transparent and open and honest with us, and living up to the agreements on both that as well as on the internal service fund.
But maybe I'm not recalling it correctly, but if the money wasn't needed, you're right, it was the Board of Ed's money, but wasn't there an understanding that if they had that excess money, that it was to be put, I think maybe you made them put it into the internal service fund?
It was never, it was never returned to the town like the 700,000 that I recall. Mrs. Leclerc, you were here.
Yeah, I
Mr.
don't
DeWitt?
think so.
No.
Went right into their budget.
Well, I don't recall it that way. I think there was an understanding that the Board of Ed did something with that money that was agreeable with the Board of Finance. That's my recollection of it. Maybe I'm wrong, but that's how I recall it. Okay, so, all right, I don't know if there's going to be any more discussion on this, but I may be making a motion on it.
Sure. Any other questions, comments, concerns from board members on this? Seeing none?
So I'm looking at the cut for these seven, there were 7 teachers?
Yes.
Was $455,000. I'd make a motion to have that number at 3 teachers, and I think, if I'm doing my math correctly, that would be adding $195,000 to this account.
Do we have a second to that motion?
What's the motion?
To the Board of Education budget.
At
Yeah,
it's
'cause they can't do it to account.
$195,000.
Add $195,000 to the budget.
I believe we have a second. Do we have a second? Mr. Hopkins, a second on that. That motion is now before us to add $195,000 to the Board of Education account, partially reversing a reduction made by the Board of Selectmen. Any discussion on that motion?
Sure.
Sure. Mr. Walsh?
So this is now going to be called teacher reserve under your scenario going forward.
Well, I don't know that it needs to be in there every year. We didn't really call it teacher reserve. I mean, it doesn't have its own line,
No.
right? So we
But
put
that's
it.
what, that's what it is for any, I mean, do you have a better?
No, I think that's a
Metaphor?
fair, that's a fair characterization of it, though.
That's what I thought. I'm
yeah.
just trying to call it what it is.
Yeah, but it's, right, it's a reserve that, because we know we're on the cusp of a lot of, elementary classrooms going over the top, that we felt we needed to put it in there to account for that. So teacher reserve is as good a term as any.
I'm not going to beat this to death, but on the teacher retirements, I'm not saying you build in a contingency, but I think you are conservative on it. You have, and years before, said every year, we don't have a contingency account, so we need to have that availability of that money if there are extra teachers in case stuff like this current year happened. And you've been very honest and forthright on years where, the one year where there was like 40 retirements. And you reported to us quarterly, trying to bring that $700,000 in. And we've developed a trust in regards to that. Just like there was a trust this year when there was more teacher retirements than there was not. And you said, yes, there was, but yes, I had to hire 5 more teachers at the last minute. And therefore, I needed to use it for that. And there was one other thing you needed coverage on someplace, but whatever. And you were open and honest about that, and this system has seemed to have worked. I have a problem putting in what I call in a somewhat second reserve. I know you have a problem with that terminology, but that's the way I look at it. And especially with it being such a large number, and even at the 3, until I see that we have a bad year, even by 1 or something, I'm going to have a problem with it. I mean, it's, you throw a coin up in the air. I know you do your best, you say, to estimate it. You throw a coin up in the air. getting heads 10 times in a row on your side makes it look like it's being conservative. It just does. It just has a certain look to it. I don't mind that, as long as we all have a true-up and we ask the question at our quarterly right after September ends and October happens. So for that reason, I'm not going to be able to support Mr. Matola's motion.
Mr. DeWitt?
I like the idea of the teacher reserve, or whatever you just call that. But until, and it'll be the next gentleman or lady in your shoes, till there's some process, hopefully next year's budget process, that can assess retirees versus teacher reserve and come up with some way of portraying that to us in a meaningful way. I don't know what precedent to set. Is it the 455 or the 455 minus 195 for Mr. Matola? But I like Mr. Walsh. I think I'm going to have a tough time voting for the 195 edition. I think it'd be better to start with or leave the 455 where we are, set that precedent.
Thank you, Mr. DeWitt. Any others? I simply am just going to echo Mr. Walsh's comments on this item. Seeing none, I'm going to call for a vote on this. All in favor of the amendment adding back $195,000 to the Board of Education budget related to this item, raise your hands. We've got 2. All opposed? We've got 6. Abstentions? 1. Mr. Stone. Okay, so now the Board of Education budget, as amended by the $250,000 that was added for the internal service fund, is back before us. Any other questions, comments? Board members?
Just to summarize, we're just adding $250,000 to the budget that we got from the Board of Selectmen.
Correct. And Mrs. Gardner, can you give us that number in total so that we know exactly what we're voting on?
100,
Wish it was 1.
no, I started to talk.
Yeah.
163, 658, 561.
And that is the budget before us. I'm going to call for a vote on that number for the Board of Education funding. All in favor of that budget? Opposed? Abstention? That carries unanimously. We are done with the Board of Education budget. I want to thank you both for your diligence and for being here tonight, and also to your team for all their hard work on the budget. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. We are going to move to the revenue side of the equation. And we're going to start on page 43. And if I might, does anybody have I'd like to kick this off if I could. I've been having discussions with Mrs. Gardner and Mr. Mayor. My first thought was, could we adjust the collections rate here? You'll recall that in discussing the collections rate, the original collection rate that was in this budget was a bit lower than where we'd currently been trending and lower than prior years. I thought we had some headroom on that. Mrs. Gardner and Mr. Mayor explained to me just before this meeting, as they recalculated everything based on the Board of Selectmen cuts, that what ends up happening, the toggle here, the switch, is the collection rate, because the mill rate can only be adjusted so much. So, and it can only be adjusted to a certain decimal place. So when you adjust the mill rate to allow for what the Board of Selectmen did, the collection rate ticks up a percentage point, a hundredth of a percentage point in the book. So we really don't have any differential now between the collection rate year over year. Is that a fair statement, Mr. Mayor and Mrs. Gardner?
I often wish I could explain things as clearly as you do. That's exactly correct.
Thank you. I don't know
We
what I
vote
did
on his
there.
budget now or
I know,
something?
exactly. Going to make me blush here. No. So, we started discussing the prior year tax levy, and Mr. Mayor, can you tell us what we might be able to do there, please?
Yeah, the current budget, hold on a second. Didn't realize you were going there right now.
We are.
Top line.
prior year tax levy.
Second line, sorry. Sorry,
Current year budget, it's $2 million. 2017 budget is $2,074,000. The year-to-date collections this year is $2,185,000 already. And year-to-date 15, $2,003,000. Year-to-date 14, only $1,007,000. But it appears the way we're trending and with the activity that prior year collection number could readily be adjusted upward by $100,000 to $150,000. I wouldn't want to go beyond that.
Okay.
Did you say fiscal year 14 was 1.7?
Fiscal year 14 was, no, excuse me, fiscal year 14 year-to-date was 1.7. Through March 30. I'm sorry. I think I did
For fiscal
misspeak.
year 2014?
To fiscal year 2014.
Okay.
But I thought there's a fiscal year 14 actual for prior year levy in the book for 1,000,009.
Wasn't a, you're right, we didn't collect a lot in the last quarter.
So it was 1.9, then the next year was 2.3.
2.3 was, these are March numbers.
They're all March.
They're all March numbers.
Okay, that's, you did.
Yeah, you have the actual numbers in your budget book.
Right.
Okay.
So you're confident that we can raise this by $100,000 to $150,000?
Yes, sir.
Any questions, comments, concerns from board members? Being that I raised it, I'd like to make a motion that we raise the prior year tax levy estimate by $150,000 in the 2017 book, which is line item 01080-40010, prior year tax levy. Do I have a second? We'll go with Mr. DeWitt. Any discussion on this item?
I just have one question. In regards to 15, where we had 2,003,000 as an actual, where were we at March 30th? Versus where we are now? The 16 actual?
March 30, 16, 2185.
2,185. And what was the March 30th actual for the 15, where we ended up?
I'm
the
s-
act-
15, 2319.
How can we be 2,319 and 15 when the whole actual was 2,307?
That has a lot to do with transfers and
So we had more
and
money in.
overpayments and that type of thing.
So at the end of the third quarter, we had more money in, and then in the fourth quarter, we went negative on that?
Because of
transferred
the
it out.
cleanup of transfers. One of the things that that we're accounting for, I don't want to say more, during the year with respect to transfers and overpayment allocations are being handled more effectively and efficiently than they used to be. But yeah, so there was a cleanup there at the end of that year.
So what you're saying was that you cleaned up the accounts
Correct.
and adjusted it downwards in the fourth quarter.
Correct.
So the overall for the year, you're confident in the actual figure. It
Correct.
was overstated at the 9-month mark.
Correct.
Okay.
Any other questions, comments? Okay. All in favor of raising this item by $150,000? Opposed? Abstentions? Okay, we've done that with prior tax levy. Mr. Walsh, I think you had something on revenue that you wanted to discuss, did you not?
Oh, yeah. I'm going to do a handout for everybody.
Yeah, I'm going to ask. Thank you.
Mine comes in the area of real estate tax, the real estate conveyance tax. which I believe the Board of Selectmen raised it by 200,000 off of what the first selectman had in his budget. I'm suggesting here that, and my motion's going to be to raise it by 50,000, and on my chart that I'm handing out, my conveyance tax analysis, I looked at the last 5 fiscal years for which we had data. And if you look at the variance and take those variances and divide them by 5, the average variance was that we collected $335,300 more on average than what we budgeted. Now, I understand, I knew that in 2014, which was a large anomaly, was 846. Well, that was the year that we had the Klebans and their various entities sold all their properties to this company, various LLCs that start off with R-K Fairfield, and it's basically a REIT fund for regions, and Kleban a combination. And they sold all those properties, and in one day, on March 14th in 2014, we got a check in for $269,000 of conveyance tax. Now, clearly, we're not going to have that all the time, so it threw those numbers out of whack. So on the next line, I did the average, taking out that outlier. And if you take out that outlier of $269,000 in 2014, the average is still $281,500 variance. So I feel as though, in addition to what the Board of Selectmen put in of $200,000, that we could actually go to $250,000. So I want to, my motion is to increase it by $50,000. I believe our real estate market is strong. I know my real estate market is picked up a lot more and a lot earlier than it normally has. And I know from other attorneys that I've spoken to, real estate people I've spoken to. I met with an insurance person who owns an insurance company, and he's seeing having to give house insurance a lot earlier and a lot more policies, that the market seems to be pretty good. So based on that and the fact that the numbers back us up, I'm going to make a motion to increase the real estate tax conveyance by $50,000.
Thank you. Do we have a second to Mr. Walsh's motions? Mr. Stone? Okay, second. And that came from a real estate agent, so that's a good sign.
But I did it.
Do we have comments, questions on this item? Mr. Mayor, where are we year-to-date on conveyance tax, if you don't mind?
Year-to-date, per the munis, is when I looked at that this afternoon, it was $1,285,000. That is probably lags couple weeks.
Right.
So if you assumed it didn't lag at all, that would extrapolate out to 1.713. If you add in that extra couple of weeks, obviously it'd be a bit higher.
If we were to approve Mr. Walsh's motion, what would our total be for next year at this point? It would be 1.850?
Yes.
Okay. Anybody have any questions, comments, concerns on this? Mr. Stone?
I just have a question. If GE gets sold, that's a conveyance tax too coming in, right? Or is that,
Yes, it would be.
okay.
Large.
I know.
Okay. Any other questions, comments on this? Mr. Hopkins?
Mr. Mayor, what methodology did you use to determine the amounts of money for the real estate conveyance tax?
We mean the original
Yes, the
budget?
budget.
I think it's, we have,
Department estimate is what's listed.
yeah,
How did you
I was going to go
determine
through the background. No, we basically, there's three ways the budget is, the numbers are speaking broadly. There's 3-year average for those where there's really no way to actually, nail it down. And then the department estimate, department leader determination. So basically, this is based upon discussions between the department heads, finance department, with obviously the department head having the weighted say in the discussion, where they think the market is, what they think is going on, what they think the activity is. So it's based upon theoretically an intellectual decision.
Well, when you talk about a department head, in this case, you're talking about the town clerk?
Yes.
Okay.
And remember, we did get an email from her. I believe it went to the entire board for the Board of Selectmen's vote, that she was comfortable with at least the raising of the 1.6 to the 1.8 that was done the other day, just for full disclosure.
Okay.
And after putting this analysis together, I did try to meet with her this afternoon, but she was in classes this afternoon. She wasn't available, so she wasn't going to be in for the rest of the day. So I did stop by there, and the assistant told me that she was not going to be in for the rest of the day.
So the number she agreed to, was that the number you're proposing tonight, or was that?
No, the
or
number
you're-
that, the one that she issued an email on was the Board of Selectmen increase by $200,000.
Okay.
Any other questions, comments, concerns? Seeing none, I'm going to call this item for a vote to raise conveyance taxes from the current amount of $1.8 million, which was adjusted by the Board of Selectmen, to the 1.850 number for conveyance taxes. All in favor? Opposed? Abstentions? Okay, that item passes, so we've raised revenue there. Any other revenue items that anyone would like to review? I have one myself. I'll wait. Seeing none, Mr. Mayor, can we take a look at the interest category there? I'm not trying to push anything, I just want to know if there's any additional thoughts on this item, because it is a dramatic reduction. I'm looking for that, thank you, Deb.
The number that's in there is the,
It's page 45, and it's really three numbers, right? My apologies, Mr. Mayor, I didn't mean to cut you off. And it's 861 minus 567, which is the market valuation, and then minus the 66, which are the fees, and thank you for having broken them out from prior years. I know this year we're not having a good year in this, as is anyone, but I was wondering if there's any room in these numbers, given that this budget book was put together a while ago.
the only thing I know
Yeah.
is that, and I don't know, I haven't nailed down the reasons yet, but I got the invoice from the bank. There's a lot more activity on the bank fee side through the Board of Ed. The actual fee number has gone up a bit. That's probably going to be more like 82,000 than 65,000, but I'm in discussions to try to get that nailed down why and see if I can make some adjustments there. The 566 change in market valuation is based upon the portfolio that was in place and that is still in place because there have been no changes, assuming 25% rate increases by the Fed, which have the most dramatic effect on short-term vehicles, and our duration is about 2.44 years. 'Cause we've been short because
Right.
if we wanted to maximize our returns, we'd go more into the 5 to 7 range, but the town has historically liked to stay in the, in that 2-year, 3-year, 4-year range, and so that's where I've kept it.
So what's the answer? You don't think there's any movement in the 861 either?
I don't know, Mr. Morton might have some sense of where he thinks the Fed's going to go, but, I'm, as far as I've seen, because we're talking next year,
Yeah.
it's everything I've read, and I haven't looked at the probabilities, there's these probability factors that people send out, but the probability when I did this of a 1% range was in the 68, 69% range, and I don't think that's changed.
Okay, so you're comfortable with this number?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Any other comments on revenue? Anybody else have anything on revenue? Seeing none, I'm going to move on from revenue, and we're going to do a page flip.
Dave, do you have something?
Dave?
Yeah, well, the only thing is, so this is, well, I guess the question would be, what's our take on what the interest rates are going to do, and whether or not we feel, if we think it's less, right, then this account has some room in it. In my view, I don't think it's necessarily going to go up a point. I understand it's forecasting next year, but I think it just keeps getting pushed and pushed to the point that the number's maybe going to be 2 or 3, but it's not going to be, I just don't think it's going to be 4. So to that extent, if others feel the same, there may be a little bit, and we're the ones taking the risk on it, but there would be a little bit of room in that case. So if others are inclined to feel the same way, then maybe we can talk about it. If everyone thinks it's going to be 1 point or wants to pad it, then I'm putting how I feel out there.
Thank you,
So,
David.
If anybody else
Any-
feels the same.
Anybody else? Nope. Seeing none, thank you. Good discussion. Okay. I'm on page 77. We're going to flip by department. We're not going to call for a vote by department. We're just
You
going
have to vote on the revenue,
Yeah, do we
you
vote?
have to vote the revenue total, no?
We'll go right there. We'll go right there. Yeah. After. We can. Why don't we vote on revenue? All right, that's good. All right, so I'm going to make a motion that we vote on the revenue. Do I have a second to that? Mr. Brown? Okay, revenue's now before us. Questions, comments, concerns on revenue as a whole? Seeing none, all in favor? Opposed, abstentions? Okay, revenue is approved. Now we're going to go through the book. We'll go line item by line item, or rather, department by department. Call out if you have any adjustments. If not, we'll go quickly. Any adjustments in the first selectman's office? Any questions, comments in the first selectman's office? Seeing none.
Are we going to vote on these?
No,
There's no-
No, we're not doing it like that. Town clerk, any questions, comments? Town clerk, any adjustments to town clerk? Seeing none. Fair TV, questions, comments, concerns, Fair TV? Adjustments, seeing none. We'll go to administrative services. Questions, comments, concerns, administrative services? Adjustments, seeing none. Registrar of Voters. This was adjusted by the first selectman, by the Board of Selectmen. It was taken down by
$5,000.
$5,000. It was in the seasonal payroll line item, is that correct, for stipends?
Correct.
Correct. Thank you. Any questions, comments, concerns, or adjustments to the registrars? Seeing none. Zoning Board of Appeals. Questions, comments, adjustments? None. Town Planning and Zoning. Questions, comments, adjustments? None. We're going to go to Probate Court. Any on the Probate Court? Please, don't be shy. Seeing none. All right, we're going to go to Historic District Commission. Questions, comments, adjustments? None. We're going to go to Conservation. Conservation, going once, going twice. Questions, comments, adjustments? None. We're going to go to the Shellfish Commission. Shellfish Commission. I knew someone was going to be
I
right.
have to-
Questions, comments, concerns, or adjustments? Seeing none.
We discussed it for a time.
Okay. We'll go to Legal Services. Legal Services is now before us. Was this one adjusted?
This
Yes,
was
Mrs.
adjusted
Gardner,
by-
go ahead.
$50,000 decrease.
$50,000 decrease. Any questions, comments, concerns on this budget as amended that is before us?
Why was it cut?
I like lawyers.
Amen to that.
I don't have a comment.
Okay, Mr. Mayor, do you want to, or Mr. Tetro, do you want to say anything?
Mr. Tetro's approaching the fence.
He needed the
That's a
introduction,
nice
right?
pregnant pause there.
Full of those.
I believe the majority of the board felt that that was a reasonable cut.
It was just a reduction,
Yes.
straight out 50,000. Okay, thank you, Mr. Tetro. Any questions, comments, concerns on the amended number? Seeing none, we'll move on. Miscellaneous contingency, this one was adjusted as well, right?
$10,000 cut.
$10,000. Any questions, comments, concerns on this one? Amendments. Seeing none, we'll go to active employee benefits. This is largely medical insurance, OPEB.
There was an adjustment. This is not OPEB, this is
Oh,
for actives.
That's right,
And
sorry.
there was an adjustment up to this account, $221,461.
Okay, so as I recall, these accounts were budgeted assuming that the town employee unions would have gone along with the similar thing on the education side, which is moving into the state plan. But now it's thought that that is not going to be complete,
Correct.
unfortunately, for this budget. Is that correct?
Correct.
And how was the amount calculated?
You mean the amount of the...
Adjustment.
The adjustment upward? Basically, what's transpired subsequent to that, when it became apparent that there might be some issues with respect to the town unions wanting to move in this direction. They kind of wanted to move in mass, and there was a couple of unions that were not for it at this time. What we did is, we did some discussions, we held discussions as well with Anthem, and combination of favorable experience, just like the Board of Ed, plus some give back from Anthem, we revised the current plan. So instead of having the $784,000 differential between state and current plan, that was reduced to on the board, on the town side, whatever that, whatever that number is, 221.
But we weren't able to get negotiations done with the town unions at the present point. Is that process continuing?
I think the process will continue. The 4 of the 5 unions are open right now. We hope to have those CBAs completed by September, October. And healthcare will be part of the discussions during those negotiations.
Mr. Walsh?
If negotiations are continuing and there was a move in that direction by one or all, would they be able to be done mid-year, or once we miss this cycle, we're done?
No, you can join the state plan at any quarter. The rates go up, though, each quarter. So if we join October 1, the rates would be higher than if we joined July 1 because of the trend factor, because it's a month contract. What was the second part of your question? Oh, the second part is if the whole town goes, the state automatically accepts the body, regardless of the demographic group or the health of the group, health insurance history. But if it's a partial group, the state reserves the right to evaluate and underwrite the group and make a decision whether or not they want to accept the group.
I would just hope that if we approve this, that if during the year groups join, whether one or more of the unions join, that we'll be notified and maybe those savings can be moved by this body into contingency or something else like that, so that we can adjust them and it's just not spent some other way.
I'd like to keep them in the internal service fund.
That'd be great.
That'd be great. Thank you. Any other questions, comments? Mr. Becker?
Thank you. Just to clarify, so the numbers essentially is higher, but this brings in basically the newer experience ultimately to get to that
Combination of new
final-
experience plus successful negotiations with Anthem.
Okay, and that's the latest Aon, similar to the Board of Ed?
Correct, exactly.
And that was favorable experience?
Correct.
Ultimately. Okay, so we're fully realizing the
Yes.
favorable experience in this account?
100%.
Thank you.
All right. Let's go on. We're into human resources. Questions, comments, concerns on the human resources budget? And Mrs. Gardner?
There were a few changes.
Yes, please.
There was a cut to special department supplies in the amount of $720, and the establishment of that same money in the communications account for a cell phone.
Okay.
And more importantly, there was a cut to the heart and hypertension line of $125,000.
And that was based on trend analysis, was it not?
It was based on, I think, a
Based
three-year
on a cut.
average.
Yeah. Based on the 3-year average.
It was based upon, Mr. Timiak made that motion, and he had looked at the last 2 or 3 years of history. The 3-year average that had the he mentioned $509,000 the 3 average. That is a combination of the extrapolation of current year experience plus the prior 2 years.
Okay. Thank you.
Can I just ask a question on that?
Sure.
Was the department head okay with that?
He is kind of the department.
Is that, no, I thought it was benefits.
I wear a few hats at the moment. If Ms. Kennelly is here,
That's who I thought
she might
was
want to
the one who
address
kinda-
this.
Ms. Kennelly.
It's a volatile account. The history prior to the last 3 years was significantly higher.
It's been coming down.
It's coming out, basically, there was a law change in 1996, I think, such that it's not an automatic assumption that, this account, for those who aren't aware of it, is for police and fire. Heart and hypertension prior to 1996, the assumption was that it was job-related. Effective 1996 going forward is determined that you have to show, prove somehow that it was job-related. It's not automatic anymore, assumptive. So there's fewer people going on it. The case load in the last, because of that, we have people on it who are getting older and becoming deceased. The number of people has been dropped by about 20%, I think. But we do have 4 cases right now that are under review. And with that, I'll turn it over to Ms. Cannelli.
Hello. Yes, we very, very happily have had 2 really good years. Last year, and the trend this year is in line with last year. So we are very hopeful that we'll have another excellent year. But I've gone back to the 2010 fiscal year to look at all of the numbers from there going forward. And in that period of time, certainly last year's experience was by far the best of any year in that period of time.
Okay.
We had one awful year in that period of time. In 2012, we were up to $967,488 in expenses. The reason for that was there were 3 people who had heart attacks and surgery in that year, which drove the expenses up enormously. And those are things we can't predict, but I would certainly not build a budget around that kind of contingency. But I'm not sure I would rely entirely on the experience of the last 3 years, 2 of those having been exceptionally good. If you take out the best year and the worst year, for the most part, the numbers have been around 600,000 or a little above. So I'm not sure that 545, which is where we are now, is quite enough to ensure that we will have sufficient funds next year without having to perhaps ask for money from contingency to fulfill our obligations. And as you know, this is an area where we are entirely governed by state law. We have no control over these expenses except to hope people stay healthy and to encourage them to.
Thank you. Questions, comments from board members? Mr. Walsh?
Ms. Cannelli, I did watch your presentation on Fair TV at the Board of Selectmen, so you made some good points there about, surgeries and how much they cost and some of the death claims, and there could be spikes and things like that. It does concern me that this has been reduced to the level. I don't know if I'm willing to change that amount, but I will tell you that since this is not in the internal service fund, we would have to go to contingency if we go over. Okay, we have only a certain amount in there, and then I think that we should start getting a report, even if it's a paragraph from Ms. Cannelli at every quarterly, on where are we looking, because if you start seeing some things are about to hit,
Sure.
especially ones that we're going to have to tick against our contingency, which is not all that large, we're going to have to start making, for lack of another word, other contingency plans ourselves.
Understood. That is why I would suggest maybe a little bit more would be appropriate.
So if we keep it this way, what I would like to do is if Mr. Mayor, when we get a quarterly, could just, in the package, somehow just get a paragraph from Ms. Cannelli, like how are we looking, 'cause we won't know when this thing comes until it hits.
Two comments. One, this, by definition, is included in the quarterly evaluation and has been noted as a line item the last couple of years. Number two, when Selectman Timiak asked me about it and we discussed this, I told him I was comfortable with a $70,000 to $100,000 drop, but not $125,000.
Thank you. Any other questions, comments, concerns on heart and hypertension? And thank you, Mrs. Cannelli. Mr. Becker?
Just on the exposure comparative to those years, it's a declining pool over time that we're exposed to, correct?
To a very large extent, yes. We have lost about 7 people over the last 7 years, so it's 1 a year, roughly. We do have 4 pending cases, people who would like to get on heart and hypertension. We still do have a number of employees who came on to the department before 1996. So they still qualify under the old statute. And actually, there was a change in law in 2009 as well. The legislature let a very modified, limited form of this back in for people who were employed after 1996. But that's only if they have a heart attack on the job. Does not apply to hypertension or to incidents off the job.
Okay.
So there is still some pool of people who can come in. I have, as I think I mentioned at the Board of Selectmen the other day, verified that widows' benefits are probably the single biggest item, consistent item in this line. We've lost 2 widows over the past few years. We've got one, however, whose claim is pending. And we've lost other people as well, that people have died. They have not been replaced at the same rate. We have fewer active employees who are now beneficiaries, but the people who have died have been kind of offset by the people who have retired since 2010. So yes, by attrition, we will get these numbers down. But again, as people get older, they are also more likely to have some of these more expensive surgeries and so on as part of their treatment.
Thank you.
So,
Mr. Mottola.
so I think, Ms. Kennelly, you said something to the effect that you'd be more comfortable with it being at $600,000?
Closer to that than the 545, yes.
Okay, so I'm going to make a motion to add $55,000 to this account, and it's
To a heart and hypertension,
our hypertension
$55,000.
account. To get it to $600,000, we've heard from Mr. Mayor's not comfortable with that big of a cut, and Ms. Kennelly is more comfortable with it being at $600,000. I think that reflects the true budgetary number for this item, and I think it's inappropriate to take it out of contingency later on, when we know what the true number really should be.
Do we have a second to Mr. Mottola's? We have Mr. Stone second that. Any other questions, comments, concerns on this item? Just the amendment.
Right. No, I think it's a wise move to put this money back in there. I really do. We're just getting too close in our figures, and you just never know what happens. And if Ms. Kennelly and Mr. Mayor are more comfortable with this, I'm more comfortable that way.
Okay. Anyone else? Mr. Becker?
I'm inclined to leave it where it is. If the line does, which I think is unlikely to, but if it does go up, this is in our quarterlies, we watch it. We've been taking it the other way, kind of in the favorable for many years. The worst case is when we shore up what the surplus essentially is, that this would maybe eat in a little bit and be part of the cleanups. And on the other side, we almost never, quite frankly, tap the contingency for the true contingencies. And it would be a worst case scenario that we'd even have to go back in for a very small amount for something like this, which again, I think if you look at it is an unlikely thing. So I think just leaving it where it is, and that's where I'm at.
Thank you, Mr. Becker. Anybody else? Seeing none, the item before us is to amend the heart and hypertension account, which is 58930 in the Human Resources budget, upwards by $55,000 to bring it to a total of $600,000. All in favor of that amendment? 1, 2, 3, 4. Those opposed? Abstentions? That item fails, so the Human Resources budget stands before us as presented and approved by the Board of Selectmen.
Mr. Chairman, if we could maybe think about at least looking at maybe at a meeting about talking about maybe possibly moving this into the internal service fund.
I think that's an
I
excellent
think with
idea.
these fluctuations that we have, and especially since it's going to be something that over time will be trending downward, it just might be better something for the internal service fund to be able to handle. So if there's a hit, we're not dealing with a contingency email.
I agree. Mr. Mayor, can we follow up on that item?
Yeah, of course.
Thank you. Let's move along. Any other questions, comments, concerns on the human resources? Mrs. Kennelly, thank you very much. All right, we'll go to the community and economic development. Are there any questions, comments, concerns, or adjustments on this one? Seeing none, we're going to go to Harbor Management Commission. Questions, comments, concerns? Seeing none. We have the overall contingency to 2010. There were no adjustments to this, right, Mrs. Gardner? Any questions, comments, concerns on this one? Seeing none. Huh? Yeah. All right. Not-for-profit agencies. I'm going to read these off, and we'll just go down them, okay?
Okay. Contribution to surplus?
Did I miss that one?
Yeah.
My apologies. Let's come back to that at the end of the night and see if we need to adjust that one,
Okay.
okay? Not-for-profit agencies, Regional Youth Adult Social Action Partnership, anything? Pequot Library, Fairfield Counseling Services, Discovery Museum, Audubon Society, Greater Bridgeport Transit Authority, the Fairfield Museum, Fairfield Veterans Advisory.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes,
that budget was decreased to zero.
and moved.
And moved.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We recall that one. Southwest Regional Mental Health Board, the Janus Center, Grashmere by the Sea, Sullivan McKinney, the Kennedy Center, Mill River Wetland, Pilot House, and the Center for Family Justice. Anything in any of those? Seeing none, I believe we can flip forward. And I'm going to go to private school bus transportation. Going once?
Yes, there was an adjustment.
There was a
by-
reduction there, wasn't there?
Yes, for 10,357, it was a fuel adjustment.
Okay, any questions? It was a fuel adjustment. Questions, comments, concerns? Seeing none, we'll go to health and welfare services. Anything in this area? None in that area. We're now flipping over into the finance area.
There was a transfer of funds in this department.
Correct, the 62,008, and it was transferred over to,
Fees and pro from regular payroll.
yeah, it's in now fees and professional services. I'd like to make a small motion here. It's not a small motion, it's a motion. I'd like to decrease this by $2,008 and flatten this line item out in fees and professional services at $60,000 in fees and professional services now as it was transferred. Do I have a second to my motion? We'll go with Mr. Brown. Do we have any comments, thoughts, or anything on my motion?
Why are you doing that?
Because I want to get it to a flat number, and it's now fees and professional services as opposed to, if you recall, this was originally supposed to be a salary line.
Gotcha, oh, yeah.
And we're just moving it over. I just want to flatten it out at 60, that's all. Anybody else? Seeing none, the amendment before us is to reduce fees and professional services in the finance area by $2,008 to flatten it out to the 60,000. All in favor? Opposed? Abstention? That item carries. So that budget, as amended, is now before us. Because we amended it, I think we should vote on it. Any other questions, comments? So this amended budget for the finance department is now before us. All in favor? Opposed? Abstentions? That carries. Okay, purchasing department. Anything on the purchasing department? Nothing. The assessor's office. Anything on the assessor's office? Nothing. Tax collector's office. Comments, concerns, amendments?
Eliminate
You'll be eliminating a lot. Okay. Next, information technology. I know there's been some discussions on this. I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Walsh for a couple minutes.
There were also some Board of Selectmen adjustments to this account.
Yes, please. Can you give us the Board of Selectmen adjustments on those?
Fees
And thank you,
profes-
Mrs. Gardner.
Yeah, fees and professional services increased by $19,200. That was to move the data center from the Fairfield Woods Library. And the capital was increased by $140,000 for 2 servers that were moved into capital from the non-recurring per the new bonding policy.
or per the bond itself.
Move it to where?
It had been,
It was anticipated that those servers would be funded in fiscal year 17 with non-reoccurring. If you remember, this board passed earlier this year a $125 non-recurring, in the non-recurring capital budget, $125,000 server. But then Mr. DeWitt brought up that there was a policy from 2011 that didn't allow for IT to be bonded regardless of the price, pretty much. So that came back to the board as an item this year that I think was already voted on to come out of a contingency. Is that? I think it has. And so as the same thing, these two smaller servers, about $70,000 each, were anticipated to be included in non-recurring capital budgeting next year. Since they won't be in adherence with the policy, they've been added to the request to the budget, requested by the department to be added to the budget, approved by the Board of Selectmen.
Any other questions? All right, let's turn to the document that was passed out. My apologies, Mr. Mayor tried to forward this me early today. For some reason, I did not get it, so was not able to forward it to the board, but I did want to acknowledge the fact that it was apparently tried to be emailed before the meeting as opposed to just a handout. I'm going to give everybody a few seconds to read this, and then I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Walsh, who's had a couple of meetings with IT and Mr. Mayor about this item.
We can ask Dan, could you come up to get ready?
Can you introduce yourself, please?
I'm Daniel Siglin-Paglia. I'm the Systems Administrator for the Town of Fairfield.
And acting as interim manager.
Go ahead.
All right. This kind of came up at our discussion regarding IT, when Dan, as you might recall, had discussed the fact that he'd like to get to these virtual PCs and stop buying PCs, because there's 110 PCs that were in the budget. And actually, when grabbing a cup of coffee, me and Dan started talking about that, and I said, you know, in a perfect world, what would you want to do? Like, would you want to do these virtual PCs, or do you want to just keep this going for another year and then talk about it again next year? Maybe when there was a department head, maybe when you had time to flush it out a little bit more, whatever. We then followed up that discussion, and Dan quite frankly said that, you know, it might make sense to put some of the money into contingency, and an IT contingency that's located within there, within the IT budget. I followed that up with having discussions with Bob, and then Bob and Dan had various meetings to talk about it, and we followed up, and it seems as though they can make that happen this year. And I guess the plan, and Dan, maybe you want to take over from here about what your plan is, because the first thing is we'd only buy 40 PCs this year, but we'd add a bunch of money, and basically we'd take $119,500 out of their capital to be put in an IT contingency account for them to be used. And Dan can explain how that money would be used and why this will save the town money for the next 10 years if we do it. And we won't see savings this year. The money will be exactly the same, and he'll explain why. But we will see significant savings and save about 100 from buying 100 PCs a year, at least for the next 5 years.
Correct.
So Dan, I'll let you take over from there.
The plan that you see in front of you basically outlines what we talked about, removing funds from the budget, putting them in basically a holding area for this project. This project will actually allow us to stop buying physical implements that actually are placed on people's desks. There will still be a sort of a box there, if you will, to connect to the network, but in a perfect world, as we like to say, that box is very expensive. It costs a lot to maintain. It costs a lot of energy costs. This program will actually allow us to remove that implement and put it on someone's desk for a severely reduced amount of cost. Not to mention that the proposal that you see in front of you is based upon a 100 PC pilot, which I would actually like to run out of essentially Sullivan Independence Hall and Old Town Hall for most of the PCs that are located in that location. The cost and the savings that you see on there are actually the smallest amount of savings that we will actually have. And the reason that is because we're putting all the money into the initial outlay as to what actually run this program. For every other PC that we add on, we're actually going to save actually incrementally more as we remove boxes. The first PCs that you see and the first reductions that you see there is about 90,000 over 10 years. If we add another 100 PCs to that number goes up to approximately $280,000. Wow. It goes up dramatically because we don't add any additional hardware to actually do this. We're saving on the cost of actually buying a new PC, and for the second cycle, that PC would be bought a second time, we're actually buying it on a much cheaper rate.
So what you're asking us to do is transfer funds from specific account to IT contingency so that you can vet this a bit more.
Exactly.
In the hopes that it'll save us a lot of costs in future years and not having to replace all this hardware on such an expedited schedule.
Exactly. And one other advantage that we have with a virtual PC is that the move to mobile is quite frequent. It's something that we're asked about constantly in IT. This actually allows us to get the move to mobile applications, better access outside the office to people actually to work on their individual applications much easier. This also would actually help in a disaster recovery situation, which isn't even outlined in this because I haven't had a chance to actually flush that out yet.
Okay.
In addition to the PCs, you would also cut from the 11 servers you're requesting. You would reduce that number by 5.
Exactly. What ends up happening is we need servers to actually basically run what is the actual PC application. So we're going to split the load of what the PC would actually be doing. The PC right now is actually running its own processing power, its own hardware. The servers would actually take over that load. And with the equivalent of 2 or 3 servers, I can run approximately 100 PCs. The device that I'm looking at actually can be stacked up to actually have 8 servers built into it. Doesn't actually have to be built that way from day one. But if it was, it would run approximately 500 PCs, which would be almost the equivalent of every PC we have in town. Now, I don't think the town can be 100% virtualized. My number is an estimate of about 75%, and that equivalently will be saving the town approximately about $500,000 over a 10-year period.
Okay. Questions, comments on this? Given this, I'm sorry, Mr. DeWitt and then Mr. Becker.
Because Mr. Walsh made me smart on this. But you do want to buy 40 PCs this year just to keep up with the
Correct.
F40 that you absolutely need to replace right away, right?
It's not so much that we need to replace right away. There are going to be break fixes during the year. There are going to be PCs that go down. We are going to try to maintain PCs in a little different manner. Instead of actually trying to replace them on a 5-year cycle, as we start to go to a virtual PC cycle, we're going to move that to a 10-year cycle. So there will be some rebuilds. There will be a little bit more maintenance to the actual physical fat boxes we've got right now before we can actually get to everything to a zero box or a zero client. But those maintenance costs will be significantly less than actually purchasing new physical hard boxes.
And by being, maybe a question for Mr. Mayor, by being an IT contingency, the department head or the department manager acting can move money out of there and procure components when he is, without any other intervention, correct?
I'm sorry, no, that contingency
It's IT contingency, so, I mean,
yeah,
it's not like
I
we have
guess
to be
the
involved,
answer
right?
is yes, but from a technical perspective, but certainly from a practical perspective, we'd be reporting back to the board, let you know what we're doing, why we're doing it, and
The cost of it.
yeah,
Yeah.
totally.
Exactly.
Yeah,
This is an
that's-
estimated
that-
cost
that's the
based
full
upon
intent.
information that we've.
I mean, it's like, I almost hate to say this, but, we're doing a couple of things in this budget. One which is getting the backup out of the basement, the flood zone, right?
Awesome.
And for $19,000, and the only reason we're doing it is because you guys really made a ruckus about it. So.
For only 5 or 6 years.
We did?
Yeah.
I mean, that's why it happened this year, as
Yeah.
opposed, so, yes, so it's a collaborative effort here, and you guys have taken an interest, appropriately so, and we're really happy to, we heard you, we paid attention to you. Dan and I worked diligently on lots of different avenues and alternatives, came up with that one. Dan obviously came up with it. But yeah, we're feeling pretty good the way things are going right now in IT.
I'm personally pleased, as having been one of the people who usually sit up here every year and complain about this, that we're moving in a very positive direction. This has been the best budget cycle in many years, so I think that's largely because of you, Mr. Mayor, so thank you.
Mr. Becker?
Just, are you doing this currently, or this is brand new?
This is a brand-new program that I would
Year.
implement. There are white papers. I'm not just picking
Well, no,
something
I
out
don't
of the
mean
sky.
that.
So.
No, that part I understand, yeah. I mean, but I mean, just for the town, starting new fiscal year, you'll start this
New fiscal year, we'll actually start working on this program, start to roll it out. The program probably will take 3 months start to actually, before someone actually works on a virtual PC on their desktop. Once we start it, that part to start will actually wait until we actually obviously have hardware in place. And it would roughly take about 3 years to vet them, or 3 years, so I'm sorry, 3 months to vet them out to make sure that they are running functional. And there's other benefits that I didn't even mention, is that the new devices that we're talking about are going to be more energy efficient than the current ones that we're using. Actually, deploy new PCs is going to take minutes instead of actually hours or days. There's huge benefits to this for the town.
And to get us from now, I guess till then, even a couple months in, you're going to keep buying whatever PCs in this budget, that sort of thing.
I'm only looking to,
You're not going to have like a cushion. I guess I'm looking just to make sure you're going to be okay with hardware.
No, we'll be okay
People's
with hardware.
computers break in that beginning window.
No, we will definitely be okay with hardware to this point. We can stretch the PC. I mean, the PC cycle was supposed to be 4 years at one point. It never really fleshed out to 4 years. I based a 5-year cycle on, we had 500 PCs. The easiest way to replace 500 PCs, it's 505 is the actual count, was to replace 100 a year, which gets you there. And we can stretch that cycle out a little bit more. PCs, if they're well maintained, they should be able to run at least 5 years, and we should be able to stretch them at least to 6 with the current hardware.
Great.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions, comments on this? Mr. Walsh, you have a motion to make?
Yeah, I'd just like to also thank the IT department. I think this has been one of the better budget cycles in my memory at all. I think that it's been very forthcoming. I think there's been some great new ideas coming out of your department, and I'd like them to continue. If any other ideas in the next budget cycle that's going to save us money like this, we'd hope you'd throw them out.
Great.
So I'd like to make this motion to move $119,500 out of the capital account. Do I have to say exactly which areas I want
It's
them taken out? I can say.
57000. I would just take
Just
it
out
out.
of the line, they know where they wanted to take the money and put it into.
59010.
010, yep, IT contingency.
So it's $119,500 from capital outlay to IT contingency within the same department. Do we have a second for this motion? We'll go with Mr. DeWitt. Any questions, comments, or other considerations on this? Okay, the amendment is now before us. All in favor of that transfer? Opposed? Abstentions? Thank you. Now the budget as adjusted with this transfer is before us. Mr. Becker.
Well, so I've got just an idea here related to the 140 with the 2 servers in the woods. Can some of that be done? I mean, if you look at the servers, right, it was going to be done under non-recurring capital. So everybody else's project started months ago. This was clearly something they were trying to get done then. Looking forward to kind of as we're wrapping up this year, is there room either, well, really it'd be contingency, which I don't think we've done very much of. Would it make sense now with good, snow, at this point, hopefully it's not going to snow anymore. I know, now it's going to snow. I've done it, I'm sorry. But just sort of looking at that, those are not places to go much, but could we on one or the other, but kind of say, okay, you know what, we're going to do something at our next meeting, get them the money now. It would then not be in the budget necessarily. I think based on our last quarterly that we've got, quite frankly, I think we have the money to do both of them without affecting anything based
Mr. Mayor,
upon
could it be
that.
done this year as opposed to put in the budget next year and done through a transfer from contingency this year?
I'm trying to remember what the exact number is in normal contingency. We have the one item,
The number was 450 in normal. You've backed off some of it. You used some of it.
so a small portion, right. There's 125 that's going for the server. There's a fire truck that's 100 we're trying to, part of it's going to have to come out of contingency. fire truck repair. And I think the cost, the estimate on that is a $100,000 repair. So, so that's 200,000 potentially. So there's potentially, if nothing else happens, knock on wood, another 200,000 left.
And some of those get flushed out in our overall pluses and minuses through the budget too, but.
Yeah, we're
which weren't
trying to,
decent
the fire
enough shape.
truck, we're trying to, you know,
Yeah,
we're
just
not,
clean
yeah.
up.
Will you have a better handle on this for when the RTM votes? Just a thought here.
Yes.
Yeah, because if they,
We'll have another month in.
We're not saying, we'll have our, they vote on
May.
May something, May 2nd, yeah.
So this could
We
be
can do
just-
some early work on our quarterly
say, well,
report.
we have done our quarterly,
No, that's May 19th.
monthly now, yes.
But at least we'll have another month and
Yeah.
we'll know about snow.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's an idea, I'm just looking down, but
Yeah,
that's.
no, I appreciate that.
point
Mr.
taken.
DeWitt?
So just a comment on timing, right? If this money stays in this budget, July 1st, money shows up. PRs, POs, another couple months, right? So if we dedicate money tomorrow, what are we really saving here? A couple months?
Well, I think, and I'll, you know, let Dan.
I mean,
Dan
other
dra-
than spending
Dan- I mean,
contingency
I mean, we
that otherwise wouldn't be
I mean,
spent, which I
what's the-
understand.
Yeah. I mean, we need the one for 125 we need today. The other two,
Well,
it's my understanding we don't really need it right
The issue on the table
today.
is just can we actually spend it out of this year's?
Right.
budget,
We
not
spend it
reduce
sooner.
Next year's
Yeah.
budget. That's
Right.
the issue.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm,
But we don't know because the analysis.
Yeah, I'd like
of the
to, right,
contingency
like
fund's not
to
done yet.
spend some time to look at that.
yeah, and
There's also
And I'm
one-
assuming you don't
Obviously
have enough
looking-
in your
also have
just
one other
regular
project
budget to
we
do this.
are waiting-
Not in the
Right.
current
There's
standing
nothing,
budget.
there's nothing in the regular budget.
I
The Board of Ed,
assume so.
which we haven't, we talked about
Right,
possibly. I
which
mean,
we also have the server room at the Board of Ed, so I mean.
Oh, yeah.
We're going to be getting numbers on in
Yeah,
April or
we're-
something.
Right, so I think.
That's, yeah, that
the
hasn't
honest
gotten a lot of
answer is,
attention lately, I
It's
might
a good
say.
idea, we just don't have the facts to make that determination right now.
fine.
Right?
To cover some of these issues, if we decided to, as a board, I mean, maybe we should look at a more accurate contingency amount and have Mr. Mayor prepare that and a list of these projects of where we are. But with some of the positive variances we've been having, could we move money out of one of those accounts into contingency to kind of add money to contingency to cover these
Yep.
things as the year's winding down?
Yep, agreed. Agreed. We're good. Okay, so the budget is now before us as amended, and the amendment was just the transfer. So if there's no more comments, questions, concerns, I'm going to call this for a vote. As amended, all in favor? Opposed? Abstentions? That budget passes. That's information technology. Board of Finance, want to reduce our salaries? Anybody? Every year, all right. Seeing none, I'm not Debs. Seeing none, we'll move from the Board of Finance. We'll go into unemployment compensation. Any comments, questions, concerns on unemployment compensation? Seeing none, we're into public safety. I'm going to take a 5-minute recess here and just, because we've been going for about 2.5 hours, so let's take a 5-minute recess and come back and do public safety. Including myself. Gentlemen, come on back. We're in public safety at this point, and we're in the fire department. Questions, comments, amendments, recommendations to this budget? Seeing none, or hearing none, we'll go to police. Questions, comments, amendments to the police department? Mr. Stone?
Just kidding, but can we cut the laser speed detectors out of there?
Well, then I think we'd have to take down revenue, too, so.
You just don't use them on his road.
Yeah,
Did you speak your address into the microphone for the chief back there?
yes. All right, police, anything else? Seeing none. Animal control, anything on animal control? Seeing none. Street lights, anything on street lights? None. Hydrant and water, Anything on hydrant and water? None. Emergency management? Anything on emergency management? Nothing. Emergency Communications Center? Anything on Emergency Communications Center? Nothing. Okay, we're done with public safety. We'll go to Public Works. First budget in Public Works is Public Works Administration. Questions, comments, concerns on Public Works Administration? None. We'll go to Public Works Operations. Do we have anything on Public Works Operations? Mr. Walsh, and then we'll go to Mr.
We
Stone.
get the updates of what happened at the Board of Selectmen?
Yes, please.
Public Works Operations, $210,000 was cut from capital associated with the six-wheel dump truck.
And 40,000 associated with,
No, that didn't pass.
oh, that didn't pass.
That didn't pass. It's the only cut.
Okay.
I'd like to make a motion to restore that dump truck. Was it 240,000? 220? 210, for 210,000. We have a vehicle replacement program that we have come up with, that all the bodies were presented and approved. And we seem like we're like in the very first year of it, and we're already trying to get off track on it. If we're going to have a plan, I think we got to follow the plan. If we don't want that plan, we got to scrap the plan and say we're just not going to follow it and get into the same problems we once had. So I feel strongly that we need to replace this. And let's face it, next year's going to be a harder budget year. It's going to be harder to, if we can't afford a truck with this size budget and a 1% plus tax, it's going to be a hell of a lot harder to do that or make that up next year when we already know some of the budget drivers that we have for next year. So for those reasons, I think we got to stick to this plan and continue it. And I think it sets a terrible precedent the very first year we're going off the plan. So for those reasons, I'm motioning that we put $210,000 back in.
We get a second by Mr. Stone on that. Do we have comments on this?
Can I just?
Yeah.
I agree with Mr. Walsh. I was going to make this motion myself. I was very upset to see this thing cut because we spent a lot of time, and actually the department had spent a lot of time doing what we requested and making a plan, so we knew what we were going to replace. And so, you know, when I saw this cut, I was really very upset. So I'm glad Mr. Walsh made the motion, and I hope that we restore it, because it's either buy it now or buy it next year.
Okay. Any other questions, comments, concerns on this item? Mr. Brown.
Just something to point out, and I'm in agreement with Mr. Walsh. 2014 and 6 years prior, and Mr. Michelangelo can correct me if I'm wrong, we purchased 2 vehicles. So for 6 years, 2014 and prior, we purchased 2 vehicles. So in the spring of 2014, we ended up bonding 7 to make up for the cuts of the prior 6 years. So in effect, we didn't save any money. One could argue that it costs us money because we're paying interest. So this, to me, is not really, it's not a cut. What it is just pushing something down the road, literally, right, with these vehicles. And it doesn't make sense, and I've made my opinion known about this prior to tonight. I mean, I understand it, it's easy, it's low-hanging fruit, but just for me, it's not a real cut. Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions, comments, concerns from board members on this item? Seeing none, I'm going to call for a vote on the amendment to the Public Works operation budget to add back in $210,000 specifically for the dump truck that was taken out by the Board of Selectmen. All in favor of this motion? Opposed? Abstentions? The motion carries. Okay. Any other amendments to the Public Works operations budget?
Yes, now I giveth and I taketh. I'm going to make a motion to remove one of the supervisors' four-wheel drive cars and to keep whatever the newest one, the one with 132,000 miles, and to wait for another year to have that. I'm willing to hear from the department if they want to talk about it, but I just think that one of those they could wait. It's a small amount, and we're giving them the dump truck, and I just think that they could do without that. And one, the 132,000-mile one can wait unless someone has a, they can explain why they need to desperately have that.
Do I have a second to that motion?
Which account is that coming, which sub-account?
That would be capital outline?
Capital,
Do I have a second to that motion? Mr. Brown? Does anybody from DPW want to come forward? And Mr. Stone, I think you have a question?
No, it's a comment.
Which one are they?
Item number 4.
Supervisors.
The 130.
Thank you, Joe Michelangelo, Director of
1,500.
Public Works. The reason why the item's in the budget, one of the things we've been doing over the last several years is transitioning our managers from basically passenger four-wheel drive SUVs to pickup trucks with four-wheel drive with dump trucks. Our foremen and all our managers are literally working foremen from the number, besides Scott, everybody below him, actually, drives, plows, does physical work. So that's a better fit for our managers. We found that and we're converting them. But with that being said, we've slowly been making the conversion, and, 2 will delay that, but it is something that we could live with.
You can live with taking it out.
Correct.
Okay. Anybody else? Questions, comments on this?
You can live with it.
Okay, seeing none, the proposal before us is to take out $38,000 for this vehicle.
$38,500.
35, thank you. All in favor of this reduction? Opposed? Abstentions? Okay, that item carries. A reduction's in effect. Thank you. The budget, as amended twice, is now before us. Linda, do you have a solid figure on that budget so we can get a vote?
$15,987,585 as amended.
$15,987,585 is before us for Department of Public Works operations. Questions, comments, concerns? We're going to vote on this budget because we've amended it twice. All in favor? Opposed? Abstentions? That budget carries. We are done with Public Works operations. Thank you, gentlemen. We're going to go to the Building Department. Any items on the Building Department? Seeing none, we're going to go to the Engineering Department. Any items on the Engineering Department? Seeing none. Okay, we are now into the Health Department. Questions, comments, concerns, adjustments to the Health Department? I see none. We're in Human and Social Services. Anything in this department?
Mr. Chairman, this
Yes.
is where the veterans' money, $3,420, had been transferred into.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Gardner.
Could
So
I
this-
ask one question on it?
Sure.
Just as a question, maybe for the department head, will this be in a separate line item, dispersed out of a separate line item?
Yes, we established a new line item called Veterans Services specifically for it.
Awesome, thank you.
Okay. Anything else on Human and Social Services? Seeing none, we're going to go to Solid Waste and Recycling. Anything on Solid Waste and Recycling?
Mr. Chairman?
yes.
There was a transfer by the Board of Selectmen of the capital money to maintenance and repair of building and grounds. It was thought that these were small projects that might be handled there.
Thank you very much. I would also like to ask, although it doesn't affect this budget for approval purposes, Mr. Mayor, I'd like to get a follow-up review of the accounting for solid waste and recycling and understand really a P&L here and where we're going. I think we had a very vigorous discussion that evening regarding what's our goal here, what's the commission trying to accomplish, what are we trying to accomplish. I'd like to hold that over for a follow-up item during the course of the year, please. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Any other comments, questions on this budget? Seeing none, thank you. We're going to go to the library now. Questions, comments, concerns on the library budget?
Mr.
Yes,
Chairman?
we'll go to Mr. Mottola.
Thank you.
There's an adjustment
There's an
here.
adjustment here to library materials. a cut of $12,000 by
Yep.
the Board of Selectmen.
And there was also a transfer in the establishment of the Fairfield Woods Library accounting, wasn't there?
No, they did not make those
Oh, I
transfers.
thought that was going to happen.
No.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so, yeah, okay. Go ahead, Mr. Mottola, you first.
Thank you. Yeah, I would, I'm going to make a motion to restore the $12,000 cut from library materials. And the reason why I'm doing this is for many years, the library wasn't being funded sufficiently. Over the last couple of years, we started to fund the library for catch-up purposes when they weren't getting, for legitimate reasons, because we had some tough economic times. And I think this is just such a minuscule amount of money that it's minuscule for the entire town, but $12,000 is important for the library, and it benefits all three of our libraries by restoring this, and that's the reason why I'm supporting this.
Do we have a second to Mr. Mottola's motion? Mr. Stone?
Can I make a comment?
Oh, are you seconding his?
Seconding him.
Okay, and now it's open for comments. The amendment is
I'm
now
sorry.
before us, so Mr. Stone.
I'm going to echo what Mr. Mottola said. I was upset with this cut as well. You know, for the last couple of years, the library's been the punching bag for the town in a lot of respects. And also, you know, we've cut their hours. I remember it was closed on alternate days with, yeah, we're cut.
We didn't do that.
We didn't do that. That was their decision.
Yeah, but that was their
Money to be
decision
able
to
to
save
do it.
money, right.
And there turned out to be money there that they could
Well,
have used.
I just think this is a foolish cut, and it means nothing to the rest of the town as far as to each person. It's pennies, and I think we owe it to the three libraries to, you know, fund them the way they wanted to be funded.
Thank you, Mr. Stone. Any other questions, comments on the library funding? Seeing none, the amendment to put $12,000 into library materials, 56-180, is now before us. I'm going to call for a vote. All those in favor of that amendment? 1, 2, 3, 4. All those opposed? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So that amendment fails. So the library budget, as originally approved by the Board of Selectmen, is back before us. Mr. Walsh, did you have a motion that you wanted to make?
Yes. As you know, we've been requesting to have a breakout to see what the library, basically break out the main library from Fairfield Woods so we can see, better see the budgets and how the numbers roll through and what their operating costs are and all those things. And the Finance Department, I'd like to thank for having broken those out, and I know they spent some funds on to do that, and they have done that. And based on this, I would like to break out those budgets. So I would like to basically transfer, it'd be the numbers in gray going down on the numbers that we have, so that we would now have a main library and a Fairfield Woods Library budget. Now, I would warn, and I think Bob, and Linda would echo me, that this is just a first chance, since we're just doing this for the first year, and it could be a little rough, and the numbers might not be exactly tracking the budget until we have a year or two to go through this, and we'll figure that out as we go along, as we get actuals. Correct, Bob?
Yes. Two comments, three comments, actually. One, this was a joint effort by the library staff, library commission, finance department, and with support from Cohen Resnick. So and basically, what we tried to do is build a budget for Fairfield Woods off of 15 actuals allocated to 17 total budget. We're going to, and going forward, we're not going to make them totally separate departments. We're going to budget them separately, but allow it to roll over, so if one goes over, we don't have to like go to contingency and that type of thing. So we're going to keep the actuals by these line items by each separate facility, but we're going to account for it in the roll-up as one department, and hopefully get better every year.
Mr. DeWitt?
Right, and the manpower will be just one manpower. There won't be a main library manpower head count, right?
There'll be an allocation of it.
We're not,
I mean, you've broken out the budget,
we've
but you...
broken out the budget, we've broken out the part-time workers. There's no allocation of, for example, of Ms. Ronald's, staff. It's kind of like the golf courses, it's direct.
Right.
Direct expense.
Right, it's a core team that can go to
Right.
either, right.
Right.
That makes sense.
Thank you very much. Any other questions, comments, concerns? This item is now before us to break out the budget by the attached sheet to establish for the first time the Fairfield Woods Library. Actually, I want a second to that motion. Do I have a second? We have Mr. DeWitt on the second on that. Yes, Mr. Mottola.
Are these numbers accurate, Bob?
No.
It sounded like what you just said, that you were
No, they're all wrong.
doing your best to estimate the breakout. Are these, my question is, maybe I misunderstood what you said.
You didn't
These are-
understand.
These are the legitimate operational numbers for Fairfield Woods
There's
Independent
no
Library.
history of the branch as a standalone item.
Right.
Okay. So we went back to 15.
Okay.
Did our very best to break out the two components.
They're establishing it, and they've used an outside.
Okay, and then
firm
we
to-
used that effort
Gotcha.
to develop 17.
Okay.
And that's why I was saying, I think over time...
And next year, we'll have 1 year of actual.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, but
All
but the Library Commission, the Commissioner Board, I guess is the right word, and the staff, they went through the part-time help, tried to make sure they identified which person was at which library, what day. Very elaborate effort.
Okay.
And thank you for doing that, everybody. I think that's very well done.
And it only took us 3 years.
All right.
I think it was 4, actually.
As opposed to the other thing that took 5 years, right? Anything associated with Fairfield
You're getting
Woods
better,
takes
Bob. You're
years,
getting better.
All right. All in favor of this motion to break it out? Opposed? 2 opposed. Okay. And now the library budget is still before us in its entirety. And since we did make an amendment here, I want to make sure we take a vote on this. Okay? So the library budget in its entirety, all in favor? Opposed? 1. Abstentions? Abstention? You opposed? Okay. No abstentions. Okay, we're on to the Penfield Pavilion Complex. Questions, comments, concerns, Penfield Pavilion? Seeing none, we're on to Park and Recreation.
Can I just ask one question?
Sure.
On the budget, and I don't really care how it's done, but I guess the 12,000 cut, was that get cut from the main, or I know there's material...
Allocated.
Allocated, okay, good. That's all I wanted to...
Okay.
Okay, thanks.
Sure. Parks and Recreation? Anything? Seeing none?
That discussion every year.
Waterfront Marina? You got nothing? Carl Dickman Golf Course? Nothing? H. Smith Richardson Golf Course? Nothing? Board of Education, we've done retiree benefits. All right, retiree benefits are now before us. Anybody have anything? I've got a couple of comments on this. Seeing none. We had long discussions and 2 nights of presentations on this, including Representative Brian Vahey from the Pension Board, as well as Mr. Mayor representing the Pension Board, as well as our actuaries and investment experts. You will recall we didn't like the trend lines and where we were going in terms of full funding of the pension. We were going in the opposite direction, and we have an experience study coming up, which, as we heard from the Pension Board, is not likely to result in an increase in the return on investment calculations for this, which is one of several major drivers for the pension liability. We talked about Hills earlier as it related to medical insurance. Quite frankly, this is a potential hill for us moving forward. And I think, as Mr. Vahey appropriately said when he was here, I thought he summed it up nicely when he said, when you have a good year with your 401k plan, you don't turn around the next year and lower the contribution to the 401k plan. With that ringing in my ear, as well as looking at the trend lines, as well as knowing what the experience study or believing we know what an impact of the experience study might be. I think we're a little bit underfunded here. I want to do a couple things. Number one, I'd like to establish a subcommittee of this board moving forward to work in concert to the extent that they wish with Mr. Vahey and the pension boards and Mr. Mayor in regards to what that experience study is, so that we understand it a bit better. Number two, I'd like to charge that subcommittee on a go-forward basis with establishing a policy relative to our funding of this liability going forward. Right now, the unwritten policy has been to fund 100% of the ARC. In this instance, we know that, or we believe, and our experts say that the ARC, given the details, may or may not be as accurate as possible right now. Several years ago, I can't remember exactly when, we decided to overfund, meaning we funded above the ARC, under the proviso that we listed as do no harm, where we said what we didn't want to do was fund below the previous year level, because we thought that was risky, and because we thought that increased the long-term liabilities of the town by not appropriately funding it. If you look at page 314, you'll notice that in one specific account, 52310, retirement contributions, we're doing just that. The funding, based on the ARC, but the funding has gone down by $221,466 year over year. And this, in fact, does impact the go-forward liability and the growth of the liabilities. So with that ringing in my ear, my thought is that at least for this year, until we get this commission up and running, we entertain a discussion of raising that contribution by $221,466 under do no harm and funding it at exactly the previous year level. What are your thoughts and comments on that, if you might? Mr. DeWitt.
I think your last three words were accurate. Do no harm. We're not going to do any harm by funding it at the same level we funded last year.
Anyone else? Mr. Walsh.
I got a couple comments. My first comment is that we've always followed the ARC. It's just an easy number to follow. We we just make the contribution for what the actuarially required contribution, or whatever they call that now, is. I think they've changed that acronym to something else. But it's a simple number to follow, and we don't veer from it. We don't go above it. We don't go below it. We
No,
just
we
fund
actually
it.
have gone above it.
Well, let me finish.
Yep.
If you don't mind. That it just, we should fund it, and the taxpayers of this town should pay for whatever that is, and we should make that commitment to do it actuarially. I understand we're going to be going through a review of all the assumptions and the history of this and everything that they're going to be doing, but that has not been done yet. Number two, it was funny because I was watching one of the financial programs, I can't remember which one it was, and they said that in regards to the market change, because last year, when we were sitting in the same seat, it looked like we were going to make the exact same contribution we made last year this year. But all of a sudden now, those numbers have changed, and it looks like we're going to have to make $1 million more next year. So these things change very quickly with the market. The show I was showing last night said that the market hit its low on February 17th. And the market has been improved by 10% since that point in time. So it's, in a short amount of time, it's regained 10% in a short amount of time, which would change the actuarial model once again. And that's why we should just stay with the ARC. We just don't get in trouble when we do the ARC. I don't, Mr. Mayor, do you have any idea if we put in the approximate number Mr. Flynn wants to do?
I'm just raising it for discussion right now.
Yeah, but I mean, no,
haven't proposed anything.
that kind of number. If we put in 200 or 225, how much would that, you're on the pension board, how much would that change the, like, how much bang for our buck would we get out of that next year if there was no change in any of the other assumptions?
Going to avoid doing some math in my head right now.
We get a 200.
Go ahead. Given our plan, our specific plan, I'm trying to remember this, every extra dollar that we contribute, so let me pick $1 million because it's easier to divide by, reduces the ADEC, the new acronym, by about 11% per year for 15 years, if that's the question. So if you put in $1 million, your next year's contribution requirement would be $110,000 less. So if you put in $200,000, I guess it'd be
Round numbers would be 10% then. It would be about
11%, right?
$20,000
Right, but
less.
yes, as far as, if everything else stayed even, if you hit your discount rate, et cetera, et cetera. The other side of it is you're putting more money in it. You're
Well, we're
strengthening the
putting
pension plan.
$200,000 in, and the number we're looking at having to put in based on the most current plan for next year was about $1 million more next year.
You know, that
We're
number.
taking $200,000 from our budget now,
Right.
and we're only going to get $20,000 worth of value towards the pension next year.
Yeah, that number, if you remember Mr. Ryer's presentation, was based upon an estimate that the current year return would be 0, which on February 10th, because the market started moving in the middle of February, February 15th, would have looked really bad because we were probably down 7 or 8%. Since that, the market's gone up 10% plus, so we at least in positive, positive. So that will help next year's contribution requirement as well, that we're now in positive return. So when he does the evaluation, he'll change the estimate of 0 to what the actual was. That's assuming we stay above 0
For the rest of the year.
for the rest of the year.
Yep. And that can change too, I understand that.
Yeah, we're dealing with a lot of stuff tonight that changes,
It's estimates. It's long-term stuff.
yeah. Which is a reason, I guess, to go with the ADC. I mean, but we are underfunded, so putting more money in just gets you closer to being funded at a higher percentage.
Any other questions, comments on this item? Anybody? Mr. Stone?
I said it the other, I don't know when it was, last time, is you can put it in, we could also lose that money when it's in there.
Okay.
Market goes down.
Anybody else? Seeing none, that budget is before us.
No, your motion's before us, isn't it?
I didn't put a motion.
Oh, you didn't? Oh.
No.
Sorry.
I wanted the discussion. I didn't put it as forward as a motion. All right. Anybody else? Seeing none, we'll go to debt service. Anybody have anything on debt service? Okay. Nothing on debt service, and that is the end of the town's operating budget, and we've got Water Pollution Control Authority. Let's take a look at Water Pollution Control Authority. Does anybody have anything on Water Pollution Control Authority?
Mr. Chairman, the Board of
Yes.
Selectmen made an adjustment to that.
Okay.
They added $128,497,
Okay, for
health insurance.
health insurance. Got it. That's part of the overall. The other one. Any questions, comments, concerns on that? Seeing none, I'm going to ask for 2 votes. The first vote's going to be on the town operating budget, and the second vote's going to be on the Water Pollution Control Authority, okay? Okay. So no comments, questions, concerns, or amendments? All in favor of approving the town operating budget as amended this evening in its entirety? All in favor? Anybody opposed? Mr. Becker, any abstentions? Seeing none, we'll go to the Water Pollution Control Authority. All in favor of approving that budget as recommended? Opposed? Abstentions? We are done, everybody. Mrs. Gardner, you want to tell us some of the facts and figures?
Sir, I just recalled that I don't think the board voted on the contribution to surplus.
Thank you.
Oh,
Okay,
that's
we
right.
approved the budget as a whole, though.
Yes,
right?
you did.
So,
We didn't discuss it, though.
that's fine.
Does anybody want to talk about it? I don't.
I think we're fine. Okay. Thank you. Thanks for reminding me of that. Day late and a dollar short, but thanks.
Do we?
All right.
Are we going to get a new
Let's
number?
do the damages here, Linda, and then we'll adjourn.
Okay.
I wish I'd have made, I wanted to at least have a discussion. Should have 30. No. Ever since we got the two
Are
members,
you
the
ready?
new members on me, it's flying.
Are you ready for the numbers?
Yes, please. What's the
Okay.
final number?
Yeah,
All right.
that's what your old counterparts, man.
The town portion of the budget
The
now
town,
Oh,
now
kidding.
stands
No.
please, guys.
I went too fast. I didn't-
at 129,851,582.
Sorry, one more time?
The-
129,851,582.
Yep,
The Board of Education, 163,658,561. The total town combined budget, 293,510,143.
and what is the adjustment we did tonight, the total of that adjustment? Do you have that?
Between Town and Board of Ed, you added 419,492
Well,
on the expense side.
Right.
You also added 200,000 on the revenue side.
okay,
So that's
So
a net of,
390
really net of 219.
okay, of 219.
492, yeah.
Okay, any other questions, comments?
Just, Linda, when will, Linda,
No, no, no.
when will we have this? Will you send this to tomorrow?
Hopefully tomorrow, right. Yeah, by the end of the day, though, not early. Bob, the...
It's not going to be in your inbox when you wake up at 6.
All right,
Do we have the
Do we have-
I get that
percentages?
feeling.
Usually we get those?
can we get the percentages?
Yeah, oh, I'm sorry, I just want to show something. So today was a total of 200. Yes, I have the percentages. Okay. The overall town budget increase, Town and Board of Ed, is 0.42%.
0.42%.
Yeah, if you want it broken down, I can give you.
That's the total for, that is the entire increase, the entire budget?
Yes, the entire increase, yes, that's really.
0.42% year over year? Okay,
That's minus 2.26 on the town side, plus 1.52 on the Board of Ed side.
Minus 2.26%.
I'm sorry, minus
0.93
0.93
on the town side,
side.
and 1.52 increase on the Board of Ed side. Combined, for the total budget, it's a 0.42% increase.
year over year.
Year over year.
Okay.
Do we know what that does currently to the tax number? Right, there's it. Or is that too much? You do it in the morning? All
Let's
right,
do it in the morning.
that's fine.
All right, do I have a motion to adjourn? We'll go with Mr. Stone. Do I have a second? We'll go with Mr. DeWitt. All in favor of adjournment? All opposed? Good night, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.